Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. Chapter 62, Unity. Fire. There was fire everywhere that Ichigo could see. But he couldn't pay attention to that, not now. There was too much on the line. He had to push Hell back into his own dimension, or the living world would be conquered entirely, fire or no fire. He dashed forward with the speed of Sonido, holding Tensei Zangetsu with both hands as he once again engaged in combat with Hell. A black Getsuga writhed against Tensei Zangetsu, strengthening it, empowering it as Ichigo struck again and again, but Hell continued to simply dance out of the way of each attack. Buildings crumbled from the sheer Ryatsu unleashed with every swing of Ichigo's blade, but to his fury he just couldn't hit him. Does it feel good to let loose like this? Do you even care about all the humans who die every time you try to hit me? Hell taunted. How many have you, personally, killed so far? I'd guess around 200 or 300 so far, just from the people trapped in the last few buildings. And those were by accident. He laughed cruelly. And you still think you don't deserve a place in my realm? No, I know exactly where I'm going when I die, Ichigo spat. But that's fine, as long as you die first. Getsuga Tensho. Hell stood still that time, and the technique separated his torso from his legs, before his body shattered like a mirror, revealing Kurosaki Masaki. Ichi-go. She breathed, blood dribbling from her lips. W.I. Ichigo's resurrection crumbled as sheer horror overwhelmed his senses, and he fell to his knees. No. Mom, don't go. No. Stay with me. I'm sorry. I didn't know. That's always your excuse, a voice behind him chided. You didn't know. Cold comfort when the Grand Fisher killed her, wasn't it? Ichigo leapt to his feet and spun on his heel, Tensei Zangetsu at the ready despite the tears in his eyes. Aizen. You didn't really think that I would die so easily, did you? With the power of the Hogyoku, I cannot die. But I can be enslaved, it seems. I apologize for the illusion. It was not my choice. And chains erupted from Aizen's chest, forming a collar around his neck, with the leash being held by Hell, who stood several meters away. You cannot win, Kurosaki Ichigo, Hell told him with a slight smile. Not when you delivered such a wonderful power to me. If only you hadn't killed him, then maybe the two of you could have bound me, but we'll never know. Now come, Aizen. Let us finish what you started. Create the Oken, and we will conquer the Ryo as well. Ichi-go. Masaki whispered. Wake up. What? Ichigo. Ichigo, wake up. Ichigo's eyes flared open, lunging from the bed and pinning Neliel to the wall by her neck with his left hand while Zangetsu leapt into his right. He blinked, awareness returning to him, and a moment later he let go of Neliel and lowered Zangetsu. Sorry, he mumbled. The Arrancar rubbed her neck lightly. We can talk about this later. There's no time. Hell has launched an invasion force. It's large, several hundred Togabito according to Pesh. Stark and Harabel are already there, fighting. Ulquiorra is gathering some of the Vastolord. We need you to lead the charge. All Hollows respect the king, but if the king won't fight, why should they? Ichigo's expression hardened as he nodded. Take me there. In response, Neliel vanished in a burst of Sonido. Ichigo followed with Shuinpa. Moments later, they emerged from Las Noches, and they made a sharp left. Several moments later, they leapt into the sky, and as they passed over one of the countless sand dunes of Hueco Mundo, Ichigo could suddenly see them. Dozens of Ajuchas were fighting, but they were losing ground quickly from the sheer numbers. There was no time to think. There was only time to act. With a swipe of his hand, Ichigo materialized his Ajucha's mask and flared his power, moving his left hand forward. Zero. Chains, someone called from the back, and suddenly every Togabito crouched down and materialized their chains of hell, forming a protective shield over the front of the army. Ichigo's Zero impacted, but failed to cut through. Hollows. To me. Ichigo roared. Materializing the white Zangetsu in his left hand, he held both forward, ribbons wrapping around his arms as he assumed the familiar stance. Black and white fire erupted from each, enveloping his swords and his body, and when they faded, he was in his Resurrection with Tensa Zangetsu. I said. Hollows. To me. Barely a moment later, all the Ajuchas that had been fighting the army had vanished and appeared behind him. Ichigo could sense a few Vasto Lord-class hollows a small distance behind them. Ulquiorra succeeded, then, he thought in satisfaction. Then Ulquiorra, Haribel, Neliel, Stark and Lilinet appeared in front of Ichigo, all kneeling respectfully. My king, your orders. Ulquiorra requested. Ichigo took a precious moment to think and observe. The chains of hell were nigh unbreakable, and having such an army so well trained to utilize that to their advantage meant that they had an ultimate defense. He would have to think about how hell had such a trained army so quickly later. But they had materialized the chains in only one direction. Could they do it in all directions? There was only way to find out. Surround them, and on my command, everyone use their most powerful Zero. Form a espada, each of you take a side and a legion of hollows to attack with. I've got the front alone. Ulquiorra, I want you to use your Segunda Etapa and Lanza del Relámpago from above. Yes, sire, came the overwhelmingly loud response, and the hollows quickly began rushing to follow their orders. Kurosaki Ichigo. Ulquiorra's eyes betrayed nothing, but Ichigo got the sense that he approved of the tactic. My liege, please be aware that if you mix your blood with a Zero, it becomes far more powerful. We call it the Gran Rey Zero. It was one of the two things Aizen forbade his espada from using within Las Noches. As the king of Hueco Mundo, you will be expected to use this. Ichigo nodded, accepting the knowledge. With his message received, Ulquiorra vanished with Sonido to follow Ichigo's orders. They're surrounding us, the same commanding Togabito as before bellowed. Formation E. The army of Togabito quickly shifted, forming 4 ranks in each of the 4 cardinal directions. Ha! They're accustomed to such tactics, eh? Let's see if it'll protect them. Ichigo began to charge a Zero between his horns, and watched in satisfaction as every other hollow there began to do the same. There were a myriad of colors, everything from canary yellow to primrose pink to royal purple. Heeding Ulquiorra's words, Ichigo brought his left hand up to his left horn and pierced his palm, letting blood drip into the Zero. He almost stumbled when the Zero grew both in size and raw power, changing from a bloody crimson to a swirling mix of pitch and azure. But a moment later, he was ready. Now. Grey Ray Zero. Zero, came the answering scream from every hollow there. The ensuing light was nearly blinding, and Ichigo resisted the urge to close his eyes as lights of almost every possible color erupted simultaneously before him. The dark color of his Gran Rey Zero helped, shielding his sight with the cool embrace of darkness. Chains, the Togabito roared. The Dming chains materialized, protecting the Togabito from the onslaught of hollow power, except Ichigo's blast carved right through them, obliterating the entire side that had attempted to stop him, as well as one of the ranks on the opposite side. What the commanding Togabito breathed, staring at the solitary hollow who had wrought so much destruction with a single attack. Who was this hollow, that could obliterate his master's chains so easily? His horrified brain memorized the mask, the horns, the simple black longsword, the black coat. This could only be Kurosaki Ichigo. And now he understood why hell was so interested in him. Lanza del Relámpago. The words were quiet, but even so they echoed in the battlefield, making every being look up at Ulquiorra, his black wings almost invisible against the night sky of Hueco Mundo, just as he threw the glowing teal javelin straight down. Sudden, desperate understanding filled the Togabito, and he began to panic. Chains. Get those chains above us, the Togabito in charge screamed, but it was too late. The javelin struck the desert sands, and promptly exploded. The explosion almost instantly expanded to encompass all the Togabito in the army, but was ironically held in by the Togabito's own chains, preventing it from hitting the hollows that had surrounded them. However, Ichigo had destroyed the chains that would have protected him. The explosion rushed out at Ichigo, who merely drew Tensa Zangetsu and held it at the ready, charging it with a minor amount of power. Just as Ichigo was about to be engulfed, he swung his sword downwards. The silent Getsuga carved the explosion in half, sending it to either side of him. The waist-length hair that graced his resurrection flew backwards wildly as the fiery air rushed past him, but Ichigo gave no visible reaction as he waited to see the results of Okuyura's attack. Finally, the air cleared, and Ichigo could see that there was hardly any trace of Togabito remaining. Hundreds of bodies could be seen falling into miniature portals back to hell, while chain fragments littered the landscape for mere moments more before they disappeared. However, there was something wrong about a spot in the air where Ichigo's Gran Rei Zero had impacted the chains of hell. The air itself was twisted, somehow. It wasn't the air ripping open, like a Garganta or one of the hell portals. No, it was, like a spiral almost, and fading fast, curling in on itself. Frowning, he vanished and reappeared close to the aberration. He reached forward with a single claw and reached out with his spiritual sense, but he couldn't make sense of it. Okuyura. As if his mere name were a summons, Okuyura Sonido-ed next to him, already back in his base form. Sire. What am I looking at? Ichigo asked quietly. A small tear in the fabric of space-time. This is one of the reasons why Gran Rei Zero was forbidden. Its power has the potential to warp and tear space. However, all such tears are inherently unstable. In another moment, the wound will heal. I see. Ichigo lowered his claw and turned away just as the wound to the air itself finished healing. He would have to be careful about using Gran Rei Zero in the future. I have news, my liege. It appears that my Lanza del Relampago has a limited ability to cut through the chains. I was able to determine it was able to cut through 4 chains on any of the given sides before losing enough energy to be restrained by the others. That's excellent news. I highly suggest you address your subjects now. They will require confirmation of their achievement, and this would be an excellent time to recruit them. Looking at how the hollows were now approaching him, he nodded. Agreed. Taking a moment to figure out the general message he wanted to give to the hollows, Ichigo raised his voice and spoke as loudly as could without screaming. Hollows. We have won this battle, but the war wages on. Too many of these Togabito have already returned to hell, and hell will know what we can do. The next time he attacks, he will send more at us, wanting to conquer us and our world. Or he may decide to pick us off one by one. We must stand together. So far, so good, Ichigo mused. It was impossible to tell if he was getting through so far, as the hollow masks made it difficult to tell facial expressions. So I invite you now, to join me at Las Noches. Let that be our castle, our home. Isn't that cowardice, hiding while hell takes over the rest of Hueco Mundo? One of the Vasto Lord Hollows demanded. Immediately, angry mutters began to make their way through the crowd. We are not hiding. Ichigo roared, angry at the accusation. We are grouping together, pooling our strength. By working together, we can find and destroy Hell's forces wherever they appear. But for us to do that, we must have a place of operations. Let Las Noches be that place. What guarantee do we have that we won't be eaten? One of the more wary-sounding Ajuchas questioned. All talk was instantly silenced. It seemed that was the major question most of the hollows had. If anyone is eaten while in Las Noches, I will purify the offenders. Personally, Ichigo promised, his voice lowering as it became clear that he would be heard. But I do not require an answer now. All hollows are welcome in Las Noches as long as they follow my rules. Whether you accept my invitation or not, be ready for the next invasion. With that, Ichigo flashed away with Sonido. Reappearing at the entrance to Las Noches, he released his Bankai and Resurrection, sheathing Zangetsu and removing his mask. Feeling Neliel appear next to him, he opened the doors. "How many do you think will join us?" "A fair number, I think." One or two Vasto Lord looked interested. "Some of the Ajuchas and Natural Arankar." "Nowhere near all of them, though," Neliel assessed. "That's fine," he muttered. "It's not like we have room for all of them just yet anyway." "Are you alright?" Neliel asked, hearing a strange note in Ichigo's voice. "I'm fine. Just, a little tired and overwhelmed, I guess," he admitted. "I know I'm the king of Hueco Mundo, but I don't really know how to rule. All these expectations, it's a bit much, on top of the whole hell situation." "You're doing well," Neliel reassured him. "They are beginning to respect you. It was a good plan out there, and you prevented the loss of any more hollow lives." Ichigo paused and looked at her. "Yeah. I did, didn't I? Let's hope things keep going well." They walked in silence through the halls of Las Noches for a few minutes. "Do you want to talk about your dream?" Neliel queried quietly. The wizard glanced at her, or more specifically, her neck. Luckily, it seemed it hadn't bruised, but he could still feel her neck being slowly crushed underneath his grip. It was just another nightmare. Ichigo laughed bitterly. "At least I can understand those." "What do you mean?" "I've been having strange dreams lately. Every time I close my eyes, I'm dreaming of a couple of guys called Ayumu and Akio, discussing philosophy of all things." Ichigo growled in frustration. "It's just so confusing. Who are they? Why am I dreaming of them?" Neliel frowned, concerned. "I take it that this isn't normal for Shinigami?" "No, not that I know of anyway." "Is it normal for hollows?" "No. But if it's neither Shinigami nor hollow?" The Arankar trailed off, uncertain. "I don't know either. But I can't focus too much on it. I need to train." "No," Neliel argued quietly. "You need a chance to relax." Ichigo barked out a laugh. "And how exactly can I do that? There's too much on the line. Every day I delay is a day that hell gets stronger. I need to figure out how to seal him." "Have you forgotten, Ichigo?" Neliel whispered. "Your power responds to your emotions, and the more turbulent they are the harder it is to control your power. And without control over your own power, you can't hope to seal the power of others." "She is correct," Zangetsu murmured. "You made good progress with your chains when you were calm and felt the stress lift." Ichigo's shoulders slumped as they approached the door to his quarters. He hadn't even known that was where his feet were taking him. "Yeah. You're right. I guess I can take a few hours off and try to get myself together." Neliel suddenly stepped in front of him and turned to meet his eyes. "Ichigo, I was once in a similar position to you," she told him, eyes soft with understanding. "When I was one of Aizen's Espada, I was forced to fight for something besides self-defense or protection of those I cared for. And I hated it, despite knowing of its necessity. And if I wasn't sent on a mission from Aizen, Neutra would try to fight me. And even if I managed to get out of that, I always had to act as everyone else expected, like the aloof, powerful Tercera Espada. I had to act my station, both to the lower-ranked Espada and to all the fraction, every day. I constantly felt like I was under pressure to do this, don't do that. And I was afraid every single day that if I screwed up, my fraction, Danda Chaka and Pesh, my beloved friends, would be killed as an example." Ichigo looked at her, eyes wide. He was speechless. Did Neliel truly understand? It was truly a blessing when Neutra and Sale cracked my mask and reduced me to a child. I could live and be with Danda Chaka and Pesh without any further obligation to Aizen. But while I served Aizen, I retreated every day to my quarters to spend time with my fraction, some of the only people who knew me for me. With them, I could relax, I could express all my frustrations and anger and grief. But I can't go home to my family, Ichigo whispered. "No, but you do have someone here who understands you, who you can let your guard down around, Nelio whispered back, coming closer and pulling him into a hug. You don't have to be the king of Hueco Mundo to me. You don't have to be the substitute Shinigami or the transcendent wizard. You don't have to be a hero or the only one with the power to fight hell. You don't have to be anything you don't want to be. Not to me. Let me help you. His throat closed up, but he jerkily nodded, hugging her back. As they parted, Ichigo opened the door to his quarters and led them both in, closing it behind them. Do you think we'll win? Zenai was sitting quietly opposite her, meditating with the Zanpakuto that hell had given him, when he heard the quiet question. There's a good chance. It depends on Ichigo. But you still haven't told me what your plan is. And I'm still not going to, he answered easily, still not opening his eyes. Masaki looked at Zenai searchingly. Maybe you're Ichigo's smugness. Nope. Self-assured confidence. Nope. It was a game they had taken to playing. Ever since Zenai had revealed that he had originally represented some aspect of Ichigo, Masaki had taken to trying to guess it in her free time. Zenai humored her partly for something to do, and partly because he was curious what she'd think if she knew the truth. Ichigo's brilliant inner mastermind? I always knew he'd turn out to be pretty smart. Good guess, but no. Ichigo is pretty smart, though. He does well in school, but it doesn't challenge him much. Masaki nodded pensively. Sense of chivalry? Nope. Do you really think that chivalry has the capacity to send someone to hell? Good point. I just have a really hard time imagining how Ichigo could ever go to hell. I know I haven't been there much for him, and I know he got into trouble with bullies before he ever got his powers, but what could there be that would send him to hell? Many things. Zenai opened his eyes and looked piercingly at Masaki. If a man knowingly sends a legion of men to their doom, knowing that not one of them will survive, but does he deserve to go to hell? Sure. Even if he knew that it served a bigger purpose. What if their sacrifice will ensure peace for 100 generations? Exactly. He would have done great evil, in the name of greater good. Perhaps he would go to hell, perhaps not. Zenai shrugged. Let's try again. There was someone that Ichigo met while trying to rescue you. Kakuto, a Tagabito, was met here because he took pleasure in killing the people who murdered her. It's understandable, sympathetic even. And he never regretted it. Who would? But he was dead regardless. Why? Masaki asked, her face clearly showing a lack of understanding. Did he go on to kill innocent people, or do anything else evil? Not to my knowledge, but it doesn't matter. All Tagabito know what sin made them here. It's a quality of this dimension, those who are dead for their actions in life know what they did wrong, tormented with the knowledge that they could have avoided this fate if they had just avoided that action. Zenai shook his head. That one action made him. But why? Masaki repeated. I mean, I don't approve of killing when it's not necessary, but I can hardly condemn someone for not being able to cope if a loved one is murdered. The fragment of Ichigo sighed. When his sister was murdered, Kakuto had a choice, vengeance or justice. He chose vengeance, out of hatred for those who had slain her, and never regretted that choice. He never looked back at that choice, was never sickened with himself for having made them suffer before death purely for his own satisfaction. He never acknowledged nor repented the sadistic pleasure he felt. Of course he was dead. Hell is home to thousands, millions of murderers who still feel completely justified in their actions but in reality did it simply for their own pleasure. What makes Kakuto any different? How can you know such things? Masaki whispered. Because I am tied to hell, Zenai replied coldly. Because I was formed from both Ichigo's soul and hell's power. I wield hell's own Zanpakuto. Since hell's power is the force of this realm, I have greater understanding than most on what can DMN a man here. You are all the traits that Ichigo has that could send him to hell. Masaki's voice was barely audible in her horror. You are his rage, his hate, his pride. You are the little evil thoughts that everyone has but good people don't act on. Zenai nodded, a wry smile on his face. All true, but you're missing the most important part. And what's that? That would be telling. Zenai closed his eyes once more, communing with the Zanpakuto and ignoring Masaki's frustrated demands for answers. That wasn't nice. No, but she needs to understand that Ichigo is not perfect. And that Ichigo could in fact go to hell, if he's not careful. And she has to learn that she can't always trust me, either. Humph. You are more interesting than I thought. Zenai mentally rolled his eyes. It is a pleasure to entertain you. The sarcasm does not become you. Despite the words, the Zanpakuto spirit sounded amused. And suddenly, his communion was broken. Answer me. Masaki screamed, tears of frustration forming in her eyes as she pulled against her chains, trying to break free. No. Zenai snapped in a tone that brooked no argument. Only one being has the right to understand me in my entirety, and you are not that being. I am your mother. I may not have been there to raise Ichigo and by proxy you, but I gave my life to protect you because I love you. Why can't you let me get to know more about my son? If you are truly more than just the sum of Ichigo's possibly Ming traits, then who are you? Zenai's face twisted with a swath of unrecognizable emotions, and for a moment Masaki had the wild thought that his eyes looked hurt before he turned away, hiding his expression. You do have the right to some answers, he whispered heavily. But I cannot give them. I am a fragment of Ichigo's soul. If he is to fully accept me back, he must come to the realization himself about who and what I am in my entirety. No one can know until he does. Masaki's mouth dropped. You want to be reaccepted into his soul, she breathed, because then you won't have to rely on hell to exist. You could cut all ties and save me then. Zenai said nothing. That's your plan, isn't it? You want salvation from hell, the same as every Tagabito. Masaki's voice was full of understanding, with just a hint of pity. It's more than that. Zenai suddenly snarled angrily, whirling on her. You don't know what it's like, to be so intrinsically tied to the core of someone's being, and then ripped out. I was part of Ichigo, a part that he knew and accepted. He was me, and I him. We were one. Zenai visibly shook with fury, his voice lowering. And then hell separated us, but that was fine because I was still part of his soul, just more visible than before. And we fought, yeah, but we had come to an understanding. It wouldn't be the same as before, but maybe one day it could be. But no, he shouted, punching into and through a nearby wall. Hell tried to use me to control Ichigo, so Ichigo cast me out. I understand why it was done, but I hate him for that. I want to forgive him, but I can't. He twisted back to stare accusingly at Masaki. He'd led me to hell, and didn't even manage to get you out in the process. Zenai's eyes burned with hate and anger and desperation and something that Masaki couldn't immediately identify. I want to go back to the way things were before hell fed everything up, he hissed. If I can save you, then maybe he'll fully accept me and we can go back to being one. Masaki was speechless. But before she could do anything more than begin to lift her arm in a comforting way, another voice rang out. There's more than one way to go back to being one. Hell stepped into the room slowly, deliberately. What do you mean? Zenai demanded. Simple. If you kill Kurosaki Ichigo, then the fact that part of his soul is already tied to me will draw the rest to do the same. While you were under my power, I tore you apart. Once he's under my power, I can put you back together. Hell smiled, his eyes betraying only a spark of malicious intent. Instead of relying on what-ifs and maybes, or on the fickle nature of a human soul, just trust me to keep to my word. Slowly, to Masaki's horror, Zenai began to smile. All right. Excellent. As it happens, the initial force sent to Hueco Mundo was completely decimated. But the commander did see Kurosaki Ichigo there, leading the hollows. How about you lead the next charge tomorrow? Hell sounded positively pleasant, as though offering to treat a friend to a meal. Sounds perfect. Zenai bowed. Thank you, Hell-sama. And of course, our special guest will be protected, Hell assured the fragment of Ichigo, turning to Masaki. After all, I still have plans for you. Ichigo's mother could not help the cold chill that ran up her spine at that smile. Chapter 63, Self-Reflection. Ichigo woke up alone in his bed, staring at a dull ceiling. For a moment, he had no idea where he was or who he was. Am I Ayumu or Ichigo? But a brief look around told him everything he needed. He was Kurosaki Ichigo, in Las Noches. Perhaps more importantly, he felt, refreshed was a close word, but it didn't encompass everything. Well rested? Recovered? Rejuvenated? Whatever the word, Ichigo felt much better than he did yesterday. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually, which led him to the strange thought that since he was in spirit form at the moment, was there any difference between physical and spiritual? On the one hand, spiritual experience in his own inner world had impacted his Shinigami body and abilities. He'd grown stronger, faster, more powerful training with Tensa Zangetsu's fusion form. But even that was merely an extension of the knowledge he'd had for some time now. Physical appearances rarely mattered when it came to the strength of the soul. On the other hand, if his body was injured severely enough, he would eventually bleed out or fall unconscious, even if his will to fight was stronger than his opponent's, even if he had a great deal more power left. So there had to be some separation of spirit and physical form. But perhaps that barrier is even thinner than that between Shinigami and Hollow. Ichigo froze. There was something profound about what he'd just realized, something that called out to his soul in a way he didn't understand. The only comparison he had was from before he'd learned Zangetsu's name, that sense that he should know, that he was tantalizingly close to the knowledge. He would have to think about it later. With a sigh, Ichigo left the bed and began getting ready for the day. Seeing his shihakusho in the closet next to the white uniforms that Aizen had probably once worn, he paused. After a moment of indecision, he shrugged and pulled out both, ready to start mixing and matching. It was about time for a change anyway, a change to punctuate that he was more than a Shinigami, more than a Hollow. He was a transcendent wizard, and if he ever wanted to be treated as such by either race, he had to be visibly different. That was something that he discussed with Nelio the night before, after their. Ichigo blushed as the memories returned to the forefront of his mind. They'd spent the day alternating between, relaxing, and just talking about anything on Ichigo's mind at Nelio's insistence. With some prodding, Ichigo had shared his nightmares and all the reasons for the pressure he felt weighing him down, and to his relief Nelio had completely understood. She hadn't blamed him in the slightest for accidentally unleashing hell, and promised to help however she could to save his mother. She'd also reassured him that if hell were to take control of him, which she called unlikely, given Ichigo's sheer strength of will, that she, Stark and Ulquiorra would ensure that his friends and family escaped unharmed. And with Garganta, she pointed out, no one would ever know where they went. Even if they found us, it's just a short Garganta to someplace else. We could probably even get them to Soul Society if we needed. That had been a weight off of Ichigo's chest. Why hadn't he thought of confiding his fears in someone else with the ability to jump dimensions whenever they wanted? Nelio had also shattered his illusion about being the only one who could stop hell. With a reminder that Ulquiorra had managed to cut through some of the chains, she claimed that it would be difficult but not impossible for others to develop a strong enough Bakudo. After all, Urahara developed a binding for Aizen, right? She reminded him. And Aizen was beyond Urahara's level of evolution. I'm sure he's working on it. Besides, no one should expect a Shinigami with a little skill at Kido to suddenly be able to make specially designed Bakudo. Aizen said that there's a whole division in Soul Society devoted towards Kido. Why wouldn't they be the ones working on an appropriate seal? You told me yourself that they can infuse objects with Kido, which can then be used by practically anyone. Why can't they just make a seal, infuse it into an orb for you, and then you power it with your evolved Ryatsu. Ichigo had merely blinked. That argument had made far too much sense. He opened his mouth to ask why Hitsugaya and his dad had told him to work on his Bakudo then, why Tensai had accepted his reasoning and begun his training accordingly, but his voice died in his throat. He was the backup plan. Just as he'd been against Aizen, he was the last hope, not the best one. Even though the responsibility was still there, Ichigo felt a lot better regardless. The Gotei 13 and the Vizard weren't relying on him exclusively. Just in case the Kido Corps weren't working on a seal right then, though, he had promptly dressed, called for and sent Ulquiorra to the living world to pass on the idea before returning to his quarters. All in all, Ichigo's experience with Neliel had left him feeling so much better by nightfall that for once he'd had a pleasant night's sleep after she'd left for her own bed. No nightmares of hell, no strange dreams about Ayumu and Akio. The blush faded as Ichigo curiously prodded at his Ryoryoku, wondering if his power would be more responsive to his chain training today. He had a pretty good feeling about it, so Neliel seemed to be right about his need to unwind a little. The blush returned when his traitorous brain wondered if they'd be having a repeat performance in the near future. It was a good thing that Cazador didn't seem to have woken up yet. Ichigo did not need a pervy inner hollow distracting him with his own memories and lewd comments. Shaking his head, Ichigo returned to the present, eyeing the two sets of clothes. There was the Shinigami Shihakusho, and the Arrancar uniform. Neliel had made a couple of arguments about changing his appearance. The first was a simple declaration that he was different from Shinigami and from Hollow, so both races would be forced to acknowledge him for who and what he was, a transcendent Vizard, worthy of respect and no one subordinate. That bit, Ichigo understood. But then she'd also claimed that a change of outfit could help with his confidence, which would make the Hollows respect him more and help with his training. Ichigo wasn't sure about that, but he had heard the phrase, "the clothes make the man," in the living world, so he was willing to give it a shot. Who knows? Maybe she was right. It couldn't hurt anyway. After several minutes of experimentation, Ichigo walked the halls, finally content with the final product. He wore the black hakama of Shinigami, but he'd shed their black kosode, revealing the comfortable white sleeveless vest that he'd acquired from accepting that part of his nature was hollow. He'd tied a red sash around his waist to complete the look for now. It was simple, but simple was good while training. Ichigo had taken the white jacket and hakama from the Arrancar outfit and taken them over to Pesh with some instructions, but Pesh had said that the changes would take a while to do. Ichigo still wasn't sure how they did alterations or even made the material, since they lived in a desert wasteland, but figured that it was one of those things he probably didn't want to know. The only reason he'd known it was possible was the sheer variety of outfits the Arrancar and traitorous Shinigami had worn while invading Karakura. Entering the training area, Ichigo found that he was alone. That was nice. Deciding to take it slow, he materialized a small length of chain about as long as his arm. Holding one end in his right hand, he channeled his power down it to contort the chain into various shapes. First a circle, then a triangle, then a square. Narrowing his eyes in focus, he lengthened the chain a bit and focused on a pentagram, drawing it out in his mind. The chain obediently formed the shape, and Ichigo smiled. Neliel had been right, this was easier after he'd had a bit of time to relax, and when no one was watching there was hardly any pressure on his mind. That proven, Ichigo sat to think about what he wanted his specialized seal to do. The obvious answer was that he wanted to seal away hell entirely, but when he thought about that, Ichigo realized that wasn't a good solution to the problem. Hell needed to exist to handle the evil souls, and since the person was tied to the dimension, sealing away hell entirely was impractical and probably nearly impossible. The next thought was sealing hell's power, but that had its own complications. All hell would have to do was bite his tongue and die in his own realm, and he'd be reborn without any restrictions. In that case, almost all of hell's movement, including speech, would have to be sealed as well. Ichigo briefly thought about the Bakudo that he'd seen and experienced that could fit the bill. By far, the best one had to have been Bakudo 99, Bankin that Hachi had used against Aizen. Perhaps, if he could make his chains act the same way as the sealing fabric. He shook his head. That had to come later. First was actually getting the chains to fire at the opponent without using a pre-existing spell, or even better, materialize around them. Ichigo turned towards a nearby dummy and flared his power lightly, focusing his intent with determination. In his eyes, Hell's image was overlaid atop the dummy, with his knowing, mocking little smile. It was the same smile that he'd given right before kicking Ichigo out of his dimension. Ichigo hated that smile. Shoving his hand forward, palm open, Ichigo let out a wordless shout, demanding his power bend to his will. A thick chain erupted from his palm, materializing and lengthening as it shot towards and wrapped around the dummy from head to toe. Ichigo blinked, then let out a bestial smile of mingled satisfaction and triumph. It had worked. Just to be sure, he walked over and tugged the chain experimentally. It was quite tightly wound, and he could feel his own power lingering in it. Nicely done, Ichigo. Neliel greeted, walking into the room. I guess last night helped. Ichigo smiled at her. Yeah, you were right. Again. I just needed to stop thinking that everything depended on me and the rest fell into place. He gestured at the chain. I think that since I was stressed, my powers were too. Of course, Neliel agreed with a smile of her own. Your powers are based on your spirit. Your chains are a part of you, so of course they're dependent on your spiritual health. Ichigo stiffened. There it was again, the same feeling from earlier, but much stronger. That sensation immersed him, and Ichigo knew that he was on the verge of something big, something important, something that would change his self-perception forever. His mouth opened without his guidance and began to utter the words that would change everything. I am. And then the words disappeared before they could reach his tongue. Oh come on, he cried out as the feeling retreated. Ichigo? Neliel asked, confused as to why he was suddenly shouting at nothing. Ichigo quickly explained what was bothering him. And this has happened twice now? Yeah. I don't know what's going on. Does Zangetsu know? Neliel queried. If it's something that powerful, then maybe he knows something. The sensation you feel is accompanied by what can only be called an earthquake in your inner world, Ichigo, Zangetsu answered without prompting. But I don't know what it is either. I suspect that it, like the chains, are unrelated to the powers of a Zanpakuto, or even that of an inner hollow. Yeah, he's right, Cazador confirmed, sending Ichigo an impression of a thoughtful nod. The wizard relayed their answers back to Neliel, who sighed. Well, I'm sure it'll come in time, she offered. If powers are awakening within you, they'll push to be used. Maybe next time. Ichigo nodded disappointedly, but decided to let it go. You saw my chain technique. Do you have any suggestions? He asked, changing the subject to something he could work at. Neliel approached the chain, eyeing them in a considering manner. Then she took out her sword and slashed down swiftly and surely, focusing her power and slicing through a single link in the chain, making the rest fall slack. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, she reminded Ichigo. And in every link, the weakest point is the middle. She picked up a length of chain and indicated by pulling it in opposite directions. Sure enough, it was the middle of one of the links that stretched and then broke. Hell has his lieutenants, who will surely try to free him. If your seal is to keep him bound eternally, then we can have no weak links. Perhaps after the chains have wrapped up your opponent, you should change it physically to something else, she offered. Ichigo frowned. Her words made sense, but he wasn't sure how to make that happen. He said as much to Neliel, who promptly suggested he speak to Shinigami skilled with sealing. In the meantime, why not try your chains on me? She smiled in an almost suggestive manner, and Ichigo had to fight down the blush that threatened to resurface. Mentally. Slapping himself and focusing, Ichigo forced himself to look at Neliel like he would an enemy. He couldn't have his emotions weakening the chains. With a breath, Ichigo summoned his power and fired a chain once again, which shot through the air like a spear at his friend. Neliel stood still, allowing the chain to impact her and wrap her up. She began trying to break free, starting with a low amount of strength and then progressively more. Finally, she gave up and sighed with a smile. "All right, Ichigo. You've got me all tied up." She smiled again, her eyes darkened with something that until the previous day Ichigo had had no experience with outside Yoruichi's teasing. This time Ichigo knew there was no fighting the blush that burned brilliantly on his cheeks. Which was exactly what Neliel had been waiting for, it seemed, as she immediately redoubled her struggles. But even so, she still couldn't break free. Instead of frowning in frustration, Neliel instead let her smile become a simple, genuinely pleased one. "Very nice, Ichigo. Once your chain is cast and your target bound, its strength isn't reliant on your continued focus. Now would you let me loose? I do have other things to do today." "Sure. I should probably get going to get some sealing advice anyway." With a nod and a brief moment of concentration, Ichigo made the chains disintegrate. Then he frowned, sensing another presence. It took him a moment to identify it. As it happened, it was exactly who he needed. Ulquiorra. The Aaron car materialized next to him. "Yes, Kurosaki-sama." Ichigo scowled. He didn't like being referred to with such a respectful suffix, but it was one of the things that he and Neliel had talked about. As the king of hollows, he had to be shown respect by other visibly strong hollows, or else he'd have to prove his strength over and over again. So he had to put up with it. "Still don't like it. I need to visit the living world, and possibly Soul Society. I'll be back later today. If anyone asks for me, tell them only that I am busy regarding the Hell Crisis. If something critical that requires my immediate presence occurs, come get me immediately." "Yes, Kurosaki-sama." Nodding once again, Ichigo spun on his heel and gestured with hand to open a garganta, stepping through and quickly making his way to the living world. Yamamoto breathed deeply, letting the air heated by his rising power penetrate deep in his lungs, letting the familiar burn purify him. Here, deep beneath the 1st Division barracks, in Muken, the 8th and final level of the underground prison, Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni could relax his control and let his power flare out like it wished every second of every day. "Reduce all creation to ash, Ryujin Jaka," he intoned, calling forth the fire of his Zanpakuto. Flame erupted around him, a fiery blaze that licked at the walls and ceiling of Muken. Yamamoto swung in the direction of one of the walls, barking out a command. "Tamatsu." From his sword an enormous inferno was spawned, a spiral of fire that nipped at Yamamoto himself as it consumed everything within it greedily. The Sotecho's eyes never wavered, never betrayed anything but determination and a will of iron, and the fire left him untouched. Yamamoto took another deep breath through his nose, and gave a wordless roar. The firestorm that raged around him leapt to even greater heights, hotter flames that had begun to take on a slight shade of electric blue at their core. With a slash of Ryujin Jaka, the old man gathered all the fire to swirl around his blade, and then with a sharp flare of his power, quenched all the flames instantaneously. Ryujin Jaka was still released, but Yamamoto had sealed its fire. The air was hot, scorching hot, but it did not bother Yamamoto in the slightest. He had long since learned how to protect his body with his spiritual energy, especially from the power of flame that his Zanpakuto wielded. He was at home with the element of fire. Centuries of using Ryujin Jaka, of training with his Bankai, had left him unimpressed with anything less than the heat of the fires of the sun itself. The only reason he had been burned at all by Inetsu Jigaku was that he had dedicated all of his power to destruction, and little to his own protection. With a low sigh, Yamamoto released his grip over Ryujin Jaka's fire, allowing it only to manifest as a flame-covered sword. Holding it in front of him, he reached into his soul. A moment later, the sword disappeared, instead replaced by a humanoid figure made of fire. Two tiny blue flames burned where a human's eyes would be, but the rest of its face was nothing more than a constantly shifting blaze. "Shigekuni," Ryujin Jaka hissed slowly, its voice high and deliberate. "Why have you summoned me?" "I seek wisdom," Yamamoto answered quietly but strongly. The Zanpakuto laughed, the sound crackling like hot embers. You are old, Shigekuni. Your power wanes, slowly but surely. What use have you for wisdom now? I am old, he admitted. But I still have a duty. Ryujin Jaka moved inhumanly, his form contorting as it split and rejoined and writhed away into itself. We have been partners for so very long, Shigekuni. We have won countless battles. And still we have not ended that man. That Quincy. Are you hiding behind duty? Are you afraid? No. I have done all I can to prepare for him, and I have trained the two I love as sons to be powerful as well. However, I know your every thought, Shigekuni, Ryujin Jaka interrupted. You have hidden our Bankai for a millennium, waiting to catch him by surprise. Yet hell may be an even greater threat. And you are concerned that the boy, Kurosaki Ichigo, will destroy everything you have worked to achieve through the centuries because he refuses to accept that some sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Yes. While Kurosaki Ichigo does grow more mature every time I see him, I fear that he will not lend his sword to maintaining the fragile peace we have created. Nevertheless, I have a plan to mend the burnt bridge, as the saying goes. The thought crossed Yamamoto's mind that it was rather an apt expression in this case, as it was greatly his fault that relations were strained between Soul Society and Kurosaki's group. Blinking and returning his thoughts to the present, the Sotecho continued. Hell, however. You know my advice. Yes. Now Yamamoto's voice had a hint of amusement. As always, you suggest reducing all our enemies to ash. Of course. Shinigami and Zanpakuto chuckled at the long-standing joke before they grew serious once more. Give all of yourself into every battle you intend to finish. Give all of yourself for those you have sworn to protect. Such is the way of fire. We burn our enemies as we consume everything in our path. Perhaps by burning hell itself, that Quincy will hesitate, and give us opportunity to consume him as well. Yamamoto paused. Forcing Yawatch to take pause would be useful, he mused. It would give everyone a chance to grow stronger, strong enough for his army. Ryujin Jaka turned the blue orbs of flame to stare directly into his wielder's eyes. Our fires are hotter than they have ever been. If that Quincy sees your power, why does it matter? There must be a reason he has not yet attacked. Besides, Quincy abilities send souls to hell, correct? If hell is conquered, then what is there to fear? This too, Yamamoto considered for several moments before nodding affirmatively. You are right. If hell is defeated, and we have people capable of destroying his chains, then there is little to fear from the Quincy. Even less, should Ishida Yuryu succeed in using or nullifying the contract in such a way that it removes all Quincy abilities. Thank you, Ryujin Jaka. As always, my flames are yours to command. Burn bright, Shigekuni. And then the fire elemental swirled, compressing in on itself before vanishing. Yamamoto felt his heart grow warm as the spirit of his Zanpakuto returned to his soul, and he let his lips curl into a rare smile. It was nice to have things going his way. And it would be nicer still to demonstrate exactly how strong he truly was. Again. Amagai barked. The men before him groaned wearily before obediently getting to their feet and making their way back to their starting positions. Only one man, the one who had been captured mere moments before, grinned and bounced up and down, eager and willing to go again. It was an exercise that Amagai and Hinamori had developed together. After having spent a day to assess the skills of the majority of his new division, Amagai had worked with Hinamori to pick the best 4 of them and began working with them exclusively. Strangely, only one of them had been a seated officer. Flashback. This doesn't make sense, Amagai sighed, rubbing his temples as his headache grew in intensity. How can it be that so many of the unseated officers are stronger than the seated ones? Hinamori smiled sadly. We all believed in Aizen, Amagai Taicho. When he betrayed us all, while I was recovering under the care of the 4th Division, several of the seated officers committed suicide, or transferred to other divisions so as not to be bothered by constant memories. By the time I returned to duty, the remaining officers had selected members who were capable of helping run the division. Rather than focusing on strength, they focused on administration skills, paperwork, division of responsibility and such. I see. They did what they had to do to keep the division running. More or less. She shrugged. Despite their efforts, there were problems due to a lack of perceived authority. When I was able to take on the responsibilities of Fukuteicho once more, I became that authority, but I was still incapable of handling all of the responsibilities of the Taicho as well, so I left the system as it stood. I just had the final say if there were conflicts. Amagai nodded thoughtfully, his headache lessening as he rubbed his chin. It's a good idea, he admitted. And it's proven its usefulness when a division is missing a Taicho. I'll leave it this way for a while, to give me the time to adapt to being a Taicho. End flashback. With 4 people chosen, the next task was to train them to be able to capture a Tagabito. With the knowledge that they would simply resurrect back in hell if they died, the logical thought was that they would fight without caring for their own wounds, instead only focusing on destroying their opponents. It was Hinamori who pointed out that there were a group of people in the Godai 13 with a similar mindset, and more specifically, comparable strength. So Amagai had approached Kenpachi and successfully persuaded him to lend Madarame Ikiku to help out for the time being. The argument that Ikiku would gain battle experience against several opponents at once had won the bloodthirsty Taicho over immediately. Ikiku had been slightly harder to convince. He believed in honorable one-on-one fights, but after Amagai had pointed out that Yamamoto planned to use Ikiku to help face an army of Tagabito that grossly outnumbered them, and that they likely wouldn't be honorable, the third seat had listened to reason. Naturally, Amagai had then listened to Hinamori's fervent advice and gone to the 4th Division to borrow one of their healers. So far, Ikiku hadn't even been hurt yet, and he hadn't needed to use his Bankai at all, such were his skills with his Shirkai, Hozukimaru. But that healer had certainly proven his worth. After every battle, he had healed Amagai's team's wounds and restored their Ryatsu, gaining a little more confidence every time. What was the kid's name? Yamada something. Whatever it was, Amagai was definitely appreciative of his efforts. Without them, the exercise would have ended several hours ago. Amagai watched his team try to force Ikiku to submit with a blank expression. He'd formed the team with versatility in mind. Haku, a pale-skinned somewhat withdrawn young man who hardly looked older than 16, was skilled in Heido. He was also good friends with a short but fiery-natured red-headed girl named Shinatsu, who had tested very well for Bakudo. They were the Kido sub-team of the group of 4. Hei-8, average in every visible way, was the 6th seat of the division. He looked in his late teens, with common brown eyes and short, straight black hair that was in no particular style. He was calm and dedicated according to Hinamori, but otherwise was utterly forgettable. That would be changing soon, as he had managed to unlock his Shirkai recently. His Shirkai, Kodaku no Kishi, had taken the form of a broadsword wider than his own head with 2 oval-shaped holes near the hilt. It was as tall as his own body, reminding Amagai vaguely of Kurosaki Ichigo. So far, Kodaku no Kishi hadn't displayed any special techniques beyond being far more durable than standard Asachi, though that hadn't stopped Hei-8 from trying to fight Ikiku up close. He was probably thinking that it was his job to keep Ikiku, and later, a Tagabito, occupied while the rest of the team weakened and set up the capture. To be fair, he was probably right. Daiki, a broad-shouldered youth and the last member of the capture team, was surprisingly light on his feet and apparently specialized in Ho-Ho, preferring to use Shuanpa to land an attack and immediately move out of range of counterattacks. His Shuanpa wasn't that good yet, but with every battle it was getting just a little faster, a little more efficient, to help him with his flagging stamina. The kid learned quickly, Amagai noted, and he was good at judging his own limits. It was a good strategy when working with Hei-8, and likely would have worked, if Ikiku wasn't so highly experienced and skilled enough with his Shirkai to block them both at once. Amagai watched as Chinatsu hurriedly muttered an incantation, reading her lips. She was trying for Bakudo 61, Rikujikoro, he observed. It was a good choice for the situation, seeing as Ikiku specialized in brute strength, while a well-cast Rikujikoro was durable enough to handle all but the strongest of threats. But there was something not quite right. He frowned and focused his attention on her before realizing what the problem was. Judging from her expression and fluctuating reiatsu, she hadn't quite mastered the spell yet. It wouldn't be strong enough to hold Ichigo for long, but perhaps it would give her team a better opportunity. Sure enough, when she cast the spell, Ichigo was stopped in mid-motion, but the spell was already fraying. Now! Chinatsu cried out. It'll only last a second. Taking blatant advantage of the opportunity, Daiki flickered behind Ichigo, leaning low to strike at Ichigo's legs while Heiate swung at his chest. It was a good example of teamwork, Amagai mused as he watched carefully, ready to step in and save Ichigo if needed. But it turned out there was no need. Ichigo had broken free with a fierce shout and instantly avoided damage by jumping over Daiki's attack and using Hozukamara to block Kotaku no Kishi, allowing himself to be pushed away by the momentum of the blow. Not bad, kids. What else you got? In the abyss of conflagration, wait at the far heavens, Haku finished the chant with a cold expression. Heido 61, Soren Sokatsui. He unleashed a powerful beam of blue fire that obscured his vision, but when the spell ended Ichigo was nowhere in sight, leaving only a partially destroyed wall that had been directly behind him. Haku heard a low whistle behind him. I don't use Kido myself, but it looks like you pack a punch. Little bit faster, little bit stronger and you might have gotten me. The Heido practitioner began to spin to see his opponent, the simple Heido 1, show already on his lips to push the opponent away, but it was too late. Ichigo kicked him hard enough to send him right through the hole in the wall he'd just made. All right. Ichigo laughed. What's next? Heiate, though tired, looked ready to continue, but Amagai stepped in and shook his head. That's enough for now, he decided. Thank you for your time, Madarame-san. We'll continue this tomorrow, first thing in the morning. Sure thing, Ichigo agreed. It was good exercise, keeping track of 4 opponents at once. Are you going to bring more tomorrow? No, you'll see these 4 again, Amagai replied with a smile. But they may have a few surprises for you then. Ichigo shrugged, then sealed Hozukimaru and sheathed the blade. All right then. I'm gonna go see if anyone at the 11th is up for a spar. See ya tomorrow. He turned on his heel and began walking away. Ow. Haku muttered, climbing through the hole in the wall. He's really strong. Yes, he is, Amagai confirmed. But you guys are getting there. Heiate frowned and looked at his shurikai unsurely. I thought for sure I could at least hold my own against him until everyone else could wear him down or bind him or something. Amagai clapped a hand on his shoulder sympathetically. I know the feeling, Heiate-kun. When I first gained my shurikai, I felt on top of the world. I thought for sure that it meant I was stronger than anyone who hadn't reached shurikai yet. I was quickly humbled, though, when I was defeated by someone who beat me without using their Zanpakuto at all. Ouch, Chinatsu said with a wince. Yeah, Amagai agreed. Not a fun memory. So don't feel too bad. We all start off somewhere, and you're better than I was at your age. Besides, Madarame Ichigo is the 3rd seed of the 11th division, who specialize in not using Kido of any sort, he reminded them. He'd expected them to doubt their power after that display, and so he'd been ready to tell them exactly who they were up against. His team had done well, and it wouldn't do for them to feel like their efforts were in vain. All of his Ryatsu is dedicated towards offense. Only someone whose defensive or offensive power exceeds his could stand a chance alone. Even then, you need experience. I heard Kurosaki Ichigo fought him and beat him while he was trying to save Kachiki Ruki-asama, Chinatsu volunteered. And he didn't have much experience at all then. That's true, Amagai conceded, closing his eyes, rubbing the back of his neck, not having been prepared for that event to be brought up. After a moment to gather his thoughts, he nodded and continued. But he had been trained by Urahara Kisuke, so he had some experience, and a lot of power to back it up. Also, Ichigo's grown a lot stronger since then. None of you are weak, you're simply inexperienced and need some additional training before you can take down someone of his level. Heiei nodded, reassured. Now then. Amagai clapped his hands with a smile. You've been fighting for several hours now, and I've no doubt that you're hungry. Let's get some lunch, and we'll get some training in this afternoon. You almost had him, with a bit more training, you might even be able to push him into Bankai. Hi, Taicho, his 4 students agreed enthusiastically. Amagai led the way, not letting his face reflect his thoughts. What am I supposed to do? What's the right thing to do? Once the threat of hell is gone, how am I supposed to leave these kids alone again? They don't deserve to have 2 traitorous Taicho in a row, let alone so quickly. But I can't let Yamamoto get away with murdering my father. He has to pay. Suddenly, a Jigakucho flew down from the sky, approaching him. Amagai extended his hand and let the little black butterfly land on his finger. Listening to the message, the 5th Division Taicho frowned. Komoi. That was rather coincidental. Channeling a bit of his own Ryatsu, he whispered a reply to the Jigakucho, stating that he would meet with Komoi that night. He smiled in a reassuring way to his team. Sorry about that, just an inconvenient meeting later. Let's go. Chapter 64, Binding. Ichigo scowled in concentration, studying a strip of spiritual fabric. After a couple of hours of general practice and examining his students' new abilities with the chains, Tensai had performed the first part of Bakudo 99, Bankin, so Ichigo could examine it and hopefully duplicate its ability to simultaneously seal both Ryatsu and physical movement. I don't get it, Ichigo muttered. I feel the power in the fabric, but I don't understand how it would seal Ryatsu. It is not easy to understand, Tensai agreed. Tell me, where does Ryatsu come from? The wizard blinked. Our Ryuryoku. To be more precise, Ryatsu is the pressure that is exerted through Ryuryoku, Tensai corrected. But if our Ryuryoku is inside us, then how does Ryatsu exist? Ichigo furrowed his brow. He'd never had to think about that before. Well, it leaks out of our bodies, or we can push it out more. Yes. But where does it come out from? The substitute Shinigami blinked again, taken aback. I don't know, he admitted. Tensai stepped closer and took Ichigo's right hand, holding it so his palm was facing up. Ryatsu comes out through tiny vents all over our body, Ichigo. Even your eyes can release Ryatsu. However, the largest vents are here, in the wrists. This is why Kido spells are cast with your hands, it's the easiest place to gather energy. Yura Haradano used this fact to create a seal against Aizen, to seal Aizen's immense Ryuryoku inside his body and let it burn him from the inside out. Not really remembering the event, Ichigo nodded nonetheless. Seeing his students' understanding, Tensai continued his lecture. The knowledge of where Ryatsu leaves the body is one of the keys to true seals, Ichigo. Because true seals are powered by the sealed, right? So we have to tie the seal to those vents at the wrist? Right. Tensai gave an approving nod. The fabric from Bankin is meant to wrap you up entirely and feed on the Ryatsu from your wrists to maintain itself. This is not to say that seals are infallible, however. They can still be overloaded by large enough quantities of Ryatsu. You did just that when regaining your Shinigami powers in the Shattered, enough to break through the first 2 parts of Bankin. Ichigo brought his hand to his chin, thinking deeply. Well, how did you set up the fabric so it can connect to and use the victim's power? Tensai gave a wan smile. That would be the second key to true seals, and it is only taught to the brightest and most powerful in the Kido Corps. All others have discovered it independently. The answer is deceptively simple in concept, but very difficult to actually perform. Ichigo nodded in acknowledgement, his face growing more serious. Recall how you sealed your own power away, the Kido master instructed. Walk me through the process. Ichigo took a moment to compose his reply. I had to trace the strands of Ryatsu that naturally emanated off of me, then compress them into a single spot inside of me with an image of how I wanted it. Precisely. You had to prevent your power from leaking through your Ryatsu vents and store it in a different form. So, for you to seal someone else's power, I would have to control their power. Ichigo answered uncertainly. Tensai shook his head negatively. It's almost impossible to directly control the Ryuryoku of another being. But we can guide it with our own. So, I'd need to push my own Ryuryoku into the other person's Ryuryoku, and use that to guide their power in the way I want. Ichigo tried again. Either to bind the power away or to encourage it to power the seal. Tensai smiled in an approving way and nodded. Yes. Naturally, as the wrists are the largest vents, it's the best target for Ryuryoku insertion. The next largest vents are in your ankles, which is why Shuanpa and the airwalk technique are relatively easy to learn. Some truly complex, and truly powerful, seals use both wrists and ankles as entry points. What prevents someone from pushing the sealer's Ryuryoku out before the seal is complete? The wizard asked with a grimace. He had a feeling that any seals he made would take a while to perform. That is an excellent question, the former Taicho of the Kido Corps acknowledged. Nothing prevents it except the strength of the sealer. Frequently, seals are used as a final technique, only performed after Bakudo has been applied to prevent the sealer from being physically attacked. Since most mid to high level Bakudo also inhibits Ryatsu use to some extent, it proves useful in giving the sealer an advantage. Ichigo nodded thoughtfully. So far, everything made sense. Okay, then, are there any situations where a seal can't be applied? Technically. No. Practically. Tensai snorted. Successful seals typically require the sealer to exert more Ryatsu than his or her opponent. Note that the sealer could have less Ryuryoku, as long as they could match or exceed their opponent's Ryatsu for the time needed to enact the seal. For example, Urahara Dano had set up a seal to be enacted when Aizen's Ryatsu grew weaker than his own. If Aizen Sosuke had not perished, you would have seen it in action. Ichigo frowned pensively. I can't say with any degree of certainty that I have more power than hell, he admitted quietly. I couldn't sense him at all. Guess that means I need to practice with my Ryatsu. I think you'll find Hueco Mundo an appropriate place for that sort of practice, another voice cut in. Ichigo turned to see Urahara walking his way. Did I hear correctly that you've made a breakthrough concerning Bakudo? In response, Ichigo smirked and whipped his arm up to aim his palm at Urahara. It was so nice to finally get him back for the pranks Urahara had played on him in the past. A long chain erupted from his palm, flying at Urahara at high speed. The shopkeeper unsheathed Beneheim a split second later and cut through the chains as they flew towards him, only to be surprised as Ichigo directed the two chain fragments to wrap his arms to his body regardless, the broken links falling away as the chains rejoined. Urahara fell backwards from the impact, Beneheim falling to the ground. Yar, he muttered. Question answered. Taking only a moment to gather his strength and Ryuryoku, he broke free and got to his feet, dusting himself off casually. Not bad, Ichigo-kun. In fact, that was unexpectedly quite good. Ichigo's jaw dropped, then he scowled and looked away in disappointment. DMN. Neliel wasn't able to break free of my chain at all, but you managed it so quickly. Looks like I need more work on it. Oh, your spell was well cast, Urahara hastened to correct his colleague's pupil. Especially for being cast with neither the spell name nor incantation, and working despite my damaging their physical form. But I've worked with Tensai for decades on Kido, and don't forget that I was once the 12th Division Taicho and founder of the Ran D Institute. Do you really think I didn't know how to quickly identify weaknesses in spells and techniques? That said, you will want to strengthen it before you fight hell with it, Tensai added sternly. Work on adding the number of chains you use, and their strength. Ichigo nodded, still disappointed but resolute in his desire to improve. How would you suggest? Currently, your chains don't inhibit my Ryatsu at all, Urahara replied. Has Tensai-san told you about Ryatsu vents yet? Yeah. Urahara nodded with a smile. That's good. Work on using your chains as a way to connect to your opponent's vents. Suddenly, alarms started blaring, and a garganta opened right next to Ichigo. Turning, the wizard saw Okiura standing within the garganta, making no move to step into the living world. Okiura. Kurosaki-sama, your presence is needed in Hueco Mundo immediately. Another invasion force has arrived in Hueco Mundo. Ichigo's expression hardened. Understood. Let's go. He stepped into the garganta without hesitation. Urahara opened his mouth to say something, but the garganta closed before any words could be spoken. Wizard and Arrancar hurried through the void between worlds, entering Hueco Mundo at the top of Las Noches. Sure enough, Ichigo could see in the distance an even larger force than the day before steadily approaching Las Noches, and he scowled. No hollows were fighting them at the moment, it seemed. Another test. The hollows are waiting for me to respond. Ichigo half-asked. Yes, sire. The king of Hueco Mundo is expected to be able to kill any force that conspires against him without assistance. The fight for the right to be king tested your strength in one-on-one combat. Yesterday's fight tested your leadership. Today you will prove your lack of fear. If you fail, the other hollows will likely band together and try to kill you. Ichigo blinked. Abandon your fear, he murmured, so quiet he could barely hear himself. Look forward. Always move forward. Retreat and you will age. Hesitate and you will die. It was strange, it was as though Zangetsu had always been preparing him for this role. Or perhaps it wasn't so strange, Ichigo had been part hollow since his mother had died so many years ago, so of course those values would be imprinted onto his vision of true strength. Alright then. Rolling his head from right to left sharply, he was gratified to hear his neck pop. Let's give them a good show. With that, he flickered away. He took his time getting behind the group, sealing Zangetsu on the way there. Ichigo wanted to catch them by surprise so they wouldn't have a chance to pull out their chains of hell. It hadn't mattered when there were a lot of hollows firing zero blasts at the last invasion force, as they had been forced to stay on the defensive, but Ichigo didn't know their offensive abilities. Of course, Ichigo could go all out and try to decimate them all in one blow of his Bankaien Resurrection-powered Gran Ray Zero, and he had to admit that the thought was tempting. But it was probably better to deprive hell of his subjects as well. So Ichigo needed to break the chains before killing them. Ichigo paused, a new thought almost making him stop in his tracks. But what if killing them just sends them back to hell anyway? The purifying process of a Zanpakuto could send souls either to Soul Society or to hell, depending on how evil the soul was in life, but would it take into account any repenting the soul did in hell? There was no way to know, especially when Ichigo had no idea the mechanics behind Konso. He'd have to ask Urahara the next time he saw the man. But what alternatives did he have? He couldn't let them go, but he couldn't kill them. That left, what? Imprisoning them? The wizard blinked. That, actually wasn't a bad idea. Las Noches was a fortress, and as Inoue once been kidnapped and held by Aizen, there had to be places that prisoners could be kept. Ichigo frowned. Probably should have done that with the last invasion force as well, he mused. Then again, the hollow didn't really know me and complete annihilation makes a nice impression. Perhaps it was for the best. Regardless, the choice was made. Ichigo would bind them, cut away the chains of hell, and then imprison them until hell was defeated to ensure he didn't get any of his foot soldiers back. Finally arriving at a decent position behind the invading force, Ichigo took another few moments to work out his battle plan. I don't really have any wide-scale binding techniques, or do I? His lips quirked into a triumphant grin his inner hollow would have been proud of. The troop of Togabito marched forward in relative silence. They'd all been briefed that Kurosaki Ichigo, someone that their master was very interested in, was in Hueco Mundo protecting the hollows. They all knew that the chances of successfully capturing or killing the hybrid were tiny, especially as Kurosaki was able to cut through their master's chains. The biggest question on the mind of every Tagabito there was a simple one. Will I be set free? Most of the Tagabito had long since lost hope that they would ever be free of hell. Only the strongest had ever managed to fight the Kusinada, and even they were unable to set themselves free. Suicide was futile, they would either resurrect in hell once more, or dissolve into sands to join the desert of the Dmed, as it had come to be known by the lesser Tagabito. No one until Kurosaki Ichigo had ever even been rumored able to cut the chains. Suki, who had long ago forgotten her last name, looked up at the moon of Hueco Mundo. If she ran away from the rest of the troop, could she make it to this mythical Kurosaki Ichigo? The human, and how unbelievable was that? Who had the power to cut her bonds? Even if she could, even if she dared, would he free her? How long ago had she first woken in hell? Months? Years? Decades? Suki no longer knew. But it felt as though she'd lived lifetimes, constantly running for her life from the Kusinada, taking shelter where she could with the other Tagabito, eyeing everyone distrustfully. And then hell had been reborn. Suki still had a hard time understanding, hell was both a man, and the dimension. Did he create the dimension? If so, how unreal was his power? As soon as hell had risen, he had begun building an army. She'd almost immediately been drafted, where she had a place to rest and enough food to fill her stomach. Suki had been so grateful that she put her everything into learning the techniques that Hell and his lieutenants had drilled into them on how to utilize Hell's chains. But then she'd learned that the army was meant to invade the rest of reality. The living world, and two places called Hueco Mundo and Soul Society, home to Hollows and Shinigami. From what Suki had understood at the briefing, they were the other two possibilities that her soul could have taken after she'd died. But they were going to war. They were going to take over all of reality. It reminded her of half-forgotten memories of watching apocalyptic films with her children. But in those films, the good guys almost always won, or at least survived. It was very unsettling to know Suki was fighting for the demons instead of humanity. But was there even a choice? If she didn't obey, Hell would kill her. Why oh why had she framed that poor man? Why had she ever thought that it was alright to let someone else take the fall for her own mistake? She'd killed that man's child. On accident, sure, but she knew better than to drive drunk. Suki had thought herself lucky that the man had had a history of being a violent drunk, and that he too had been driving drunk on the night of his son's death. Why not let him take responsibility for it? Suki had had children of her own to take care of, and her family couldn't afford for her to go to jail, not when their own father had passed away years before. Surely it was all right to prioritize their welfare over some strangers, especially someone who wasn't a particularly good father anyway. Surely it was all right to feel a sense of relief and satisfaction when her plan worked and the court sentenced the man to prison. Surely it was all right to let out a smile of relief and happiness after the man died in prison, knowing that her secret would go with her to the grave. Suki snorted, the noise hidden in the sounds of countless feet marching on uneven sands. Her secret had gone with her to the grave, and now look where she'd ended up. She'd been a selfish fool, and she'd eventually come to realize that she truly did deserve hell, where there were hundreds, thousands of stories just like her own. She hadn't understood the true value of life, she hadn't realized that every debt had to be paid. She'd owed that boy and his family penance. And she'd spat in their faces, going on to live her own life without paying the slightest of attentions to the family she'd utterly ruined. How could she have been such a terrible person? But Suki had prayed a lot since then. She'd prayed for the souls of the boy and his father. She'd prayed for the souls of her own children. She'd prayed for guidance, and for her own salvation. It had never come. Perhaps she didn't deserve it. Suki had begun to come to terms with that, begun to accept that she would spend the rest of her life repenting until her soul was scattered into the desert of the Dmed, but then hell had risen, and whispers of the man who could cut the chains and free them all had sprung up as if out of nowhere. But maybe, just maybe, this Kurosaki Ichigo was an answer to her prayers. Could he purify her of her sins, and send her on to the other afterlife, the place where Shinigami resided, Soul Society? Or even straight to her next life? Suki wanted to know, very badly in fact, but did she dare? What if Kurosaki laughed at her and cut her down, sending her back to hell? And then, there was the more terrifying possibility. What if he loosed her chains and purified her, and she woke up in hell again? Suki didn't think she could bear it if that were the case. She'd spent so long regretting and repenting for the sins she'd made in life. If she were sent back to hell, then it would be time to think about casting herself into the desert of the Dmet. Oblivion would be preferable to knowledge that her soul would never, ever be forgiven for a stupid mistake made by a foolish woman in life. Suki was still trying to decide if it was worth begging for Kurosaki's mercy when they were attacked. It had come without warning, soundlessly and invisibly. The first she knew of it was when her arms were suddenly bound to her sides, held there by a yellow-orange chain that crackled with energy. A panicked gasp and a glance to either side showed everyone else in the same predicament. But then she noticed that all the chains were all linked. Suki looked around, then over her shoulder, visually tracing the glowing chain back, to a single man who held the end of it with his left hand. Orange hair. White vest, black hakama. And obviously very powerful. Could it be Kurosaki Ichigo? They'd not been told about any abilities with chains, but this was likely what some of the other Tagabito had called Kido, some form of Shinigami magic. She hoped it was. Maybe, just maybe, her nightmare was finally over. Ichigo smiled despite the strain. He'd cast his chain variant of Bakudo 9, Horin, since it had the capability of handling multiple prisoners at once. But there were several dozen people here, and it was draining him faster than he'd like, both in mind and in power. Regardless, he had them captured, and it was quite clear that none of his prisoners could move very much at all. Using Shuunpa to reappear in front of the troop, Ichigo took a deep breath, taking a few moments to decide what to say. He needed something powerful, but simple. "My name is Kurosaki Ichigo," he called out calmly. "And you have all been captured." With a sharp twist of his Ryatsu, he channeled Bakudo 4, Heinoa down the existing chains and released the Horin spell, stabilizing the spell enough that it didn't require further feeding from his power. Ulquiorra. The Aaron-car materialized next to him. "Yes, Kurosaki-sama. These are our prisoners. Take them to Las Noches and get them under confinement. Under no circumstances are they to be killed or eaten. Destroy the chains that bind them to hell after they've been situated." "Yes, sir." Ulquiorra took the chain from Ichigo's hands and began to lead the silent troop back to Las Noches. After they'd left earshot, Ichigo sighed. He'd used more of his Ryuryoku than he'd wanted to capture them. He'd need some time and rest, and preferably food, before anything else happened. That was well done. Ichigo almost jumped, he recognized that voice. He slowly turned to see his Tagabito aspect standing across from him. "So much for time and rest. You." He said it quietly, without anger or hate, just a simple confirmation. "Me," Zenai agreed. "I go by Zenai these days." Ichigo nodded, making note of the name. "What do you want? Why are you here?" "Hell sent me." "I figured as much," the wizard admitted calmly. "Did he send you here to fight me?" "Yeah. He wants you dead." Zenai smiled as if sharing a private joke. "Figured that too." Ichigo assessed Zenai carefully. "But you're not here to fight." It wasn't a question. "No. No, I'm not," the Tagabito agreed. "Not if I don't have to. So I ask again. What do you want?" Zenai shifted. "I was part of you, you know." "Yeah. I know now. Didn't back then, but I do now." Zenai sighed. "But you don't know what I am, do you?" Ichigo knew that he wasn't asking about his form, or even his race. Zenai was asking about the traits that he embodied. "I know a little. You're my anger, my hate, and my pride. You're the calculating part of me, the part that ignores my conscience and figures out the best move. I know you care about most of the things I care about. Zenai shook his head mournfully. There's far more to me, Ichigo. And I can't tell you. And I can't be accepted back into your soul until you know me for who I am. Ichigo's eyes narrowed only slightly. You're still tied to hell. I cast you out for a reason. A stupid reason. Zenai cried out, his voice suddenly raised, slicing through the calm of their previously quiet conversation. Why didn't you just cut your own chains? We had the power. Instead of being stupid and cutting your soul apart, why didn't you free yourself of your bonds? I wouldn't have been able to cut the bonds that hell was focusing on. He knew our power, he knew how much power would be needed to maintain the chains. Ichigo replied back heatedly. You could have done it if you had released your full power. Zenai argued with an ugly expression. Our power was still bound by Jinrain. If you'd released your own seal we could have escaped and gone unbound by hell. And then Mom either would have been disintegrated by our power, or she would have been killed by hell again. Ichigo snarled back. Maybe permanently this time. Neither of us want that. As long as hell believes that we're so weak we couldn't possibly stand a chance, he'll keep her alive just to torment us. You cast me out because you couldn't accept that I was part of you. Zenai accused. Are you scared by your own dark side, Ichigo? You saw an opportunity to be rid of me, and you took it, whether it was the right thing to do or not. Is that what this is about? The Vizard demanded incredulously. Your hurt feelings. I cast you out because it made the most sense at the time. The chains were tied to you, I couldn't go full power, and if you possess even a scrap of my motivation you protect Mom. If you didn't, then I would know for sure that you were just a piece of hell, which would have meant I was better off without you anyway, and casting you out was a good prelude to killing you. In either case I won. In either case you won. Zenai whispered harshly. You fool. By handing me over to hell on a silver platter, you negated any advantage you had. He's going to send me against you over and over until you die. Even you can't fight yourself forever. All you have done is give him another weapon. But Mom is still alive, is she not? Ichigo pointed out with a hard expression. I don't care if I have to fight you over and over for 1,000 years, as long as she lives. Silence fell. The two of them stood and stared at each other for several long moments. And what happens if hell is defeated? Zenai's voice had fallen to just above a whisper. We can't trust Yamamoto or the rest of Soul Society to keep her safe. We can't keep her in the living world because it can't provide the erasure she needs to survive, and there's no way we'd keep a powerless soul in Hueco Mundo. The temptation would be too great, she'd be eaten sooner or later. Maybe hell's our best bet for her. I hear you, Ichigo said heavily, his posture sagging slightly. But Mom wouldn't want her safety to be at the expense of every other soul in the living world. The Togabito closed his eyes tightly, and his voice was tight when he managed to whisper, yeah, I know. Once more, silence reigned between Ichigo and Zenai as they just watched each other. A minute had passed before Zenai opened his mouth to speak again. Ichigo, you'd med me to hell. The Vizard opened his mouth to reply, but Zenai cut him off. Let me finish. I understand the reasons why you did it. It was the best move, but it also cut away a part of you that you didn't understand, a part of you that honestly scared you. I hate you for that, and I don't know if I can forgive you. But I've always been a part of you, and I feel that one day we can go back to the way things were before hell pulled me to the surface. If you feel the same way, then I'll help you. We share the same goals, after all. Ichigo was suddenly reminded of his first fight with Zenai, back before he had a name. He closed his eyes, quietly recalling the words. I want the same things you do. I want to protect my family, I want to make sure they can't be hurt anymore. Don't you want to prevent more Quincy massacres? More Bount and Mod soul exterminations? Why do you fight your destiny to rule, to protect your family? Don't you want to keep them safe by any means necessary? Work with me, Ichigo. Between us, we can keep them safe. The only difference between them was that Zenai had no resistance to murdering in cold blood and carving a bloody path to the top to ensure their desires came true. Ichigo didn't know if he could ever be pushed that far, but Kami helped him. He had been close when the Barine had banished his mother to hell. He had been even closer when Yamamoto had refused to help him, and closer still when Yamamoto had tried to stop him. He'd even drawn Tensa Zangetsu on the Shinigami, and had been almost itching to crush the Sotecho. Well, Ichigo? Ichigo took a deep breath and let it out slowly, opening his eyes to stare into Zenai's blood-red orbs. Did he feel that Zenai could rejoin him someday? Yeah. You're a part of me, Zenai. I hope. One day I can reabsorb you entirely into my soul. Zenai smiled, and reached out to Ichigo for a handshake. Ichigo glanced down at his Hell Aspect's hand, where a short chain dangled from his wrist, and clasped it with his own hand. They shook firmly once and let go. Zenai smiled, and drew his sword. All right then. Now we need to fight. Huh? Ichigo blinked. They'd just agreed to work together, and now he wanted to fight. Hell sent me here to fight and try to kill you. It'll look suspicious if we don't create a titanic battle, Zenai explained. We gotta fight, and you've gotta kill me. And we need to do it now. I can explain the delay as me trying to find a way to sneak up on you, or waiting for you to recover a little power so I can crush you properly, but the clock's ticking. Ichigo blinked. It was a bit of a mental shift, trying to go from soul-searching to battle-ready, but after a few moments, he shook his head and leapt back, drawing his blade. Fine then. Let's get this over with. Get ready, Ichigo. Zenai warned, letting loose a burst of Ryatsu. Ichigo's face hardened and he began channeling his power to his blade. Across from him, he could sense Zenai doing the same. Don't complain when I kill you quickly. Tear the sky asunder, Zangetsu, they roared together. Chapter 65, Confronting Feelings. Zenai rushed at Ichigo, Zanpakuto glowing red as it charged with power. Getsuga Tensho. Ichigo dashed to his left, avoiding the crescent entirely and bringing Zangetsu down to clash against its counterpart. Bringing his left hand to grasp his shuriken as well, he forcibly overpowered Zenai, sending him flying a few dozen feet away into a dune, sending sand flying and obscuring his vision. Ichigo flicked his left hand up. Heido 33, Sokatsui, he incanted, firing off a large blue blast into the cloud, where it promptly exploded and kicked up even more sand. You didn't really think that got me, did you? Ichigo spun and blocked a horizontal slash from Zenai, who merely smiled grimly. You need to work on your follow-up, Ichigo. Firing at someone you couldn't see didn't work against Hell, doesn't even work against yourself. Noted, Ichigo grunted, channeling power down his blade. Getsuga Tensho. The blue Getsuga pushed Zenai back several feet before he was able to shunt it to the side. He immediately had to flicker out of the way with Shuunpa as a chain shot towards him at high speed. So you've discovered your chains, Zenai observed calmly as he rematerialized several feet away. Do you even know what they are? They're chains. They don't seem to have a spirit that manifests in my inner world, if that's what you're asking, Ichigo replied, keeping Zangetsu at the ready. And they don't feel like Hell's chains, so the best I can tell is that they're a special ability that belongs to me. A special ability that belongs to you? You don't have a clue, do you? Zenai chuckled. If Zangetsu is our idea of true strength, and Cazador our instinct, just who are you? Before Ichigo could open his mouth to respond, Zenai Shuunpaed in front of him and forced Ichigo to defend himself from several slashes. Who are you? Zenai yelled, suddenly angry now. Who am I? You know nothing, Ichigo. For all your power, for all that you have learned and experienced, you are still a stranger to yourself. You know Aizen Sosuke better than you know yourself. That's not true. Ichigo roared, taking up the attack, only to be deadlocked by his Hell Aspect, each blade pressing against its counterpart with neither giving an inch. "It is," Zenai insisted. "I was there with you for all those years. All that time when the only way you could express yourself was violence. All those times you purposely sought out and provoked those gangs, just to feel anything at all beyond guilt and grief and anger and uselessness. All you know is how to fight. All your life you have only found purpose through war. So what?" Ichigo growled, pushing harder against Zenai, only to be perfectly matched. "Are you nothing but a weapon?" the Togabito demanded, staring into Ichigo's eyes with an intensity, a need that Ichigo didn't understand. "Are you only happy when you fight? When there is no one to save, when your power is not needed, what will you do with yourself?" "I was trying to find out before all this started," the wizard retorted. "And you had no FNG idea?" Zenai cried out, breaking the deadlock himself and jumping back. "What do you want to do when you graduate high school? Do you want to go to a university? Do you want to be a writer, a fireman, an actor? A police officer, a baker? A doctor, an astronaut? What do you want to be? What do you like to do? You don't know. All you know is that you feel alive when you fight, and even that was engineered by none other than Aizen when he killed our mother. Have you no true identity to call your own? Who are you?" With a wordless scream, Ichigo flung Zangetsu at his opponent, channeling a Getsuga as it flew. Zenai dodged and made to cut the cloth, but the wizard tugged and called it back immediately, catching Zangetsu and holding it at the ready once again. "I am Kurosaki Ichigo," he whispered. "And I dream of a world where those I want to protect are safe and happy, of a time where I can put down the sword without fear. And when that happens, I want to create something beautiful. I don't know what yet, but I'll have a lifetime to figure it out. That's what I want. And if that time never happens? If you're never able to put down the sword?" Ichigo grit his teeth, a blue fire blazing in his eyes as he raised Zangetsu once more. "Then I'll pave the way for someone else." Zenai slowly nodded. "Yes. That is who you are. Keep that in mind, Ichigo." He reached to his side with his left hand, and drew another sword, this one unfamiliar. "Because Hell's Zanpakuto will tear your mind to shreds otherwise. Reveal the truth, Asahi no Kagami." Urahara peered at the display with a careful eye, with Ishida and Inoue looking over his shoulder. The original contract had been written in German, but Urahara had merely scanned the contents into his computer and had it translated in minutes. The translation was then projected onto a very, very large screen for easier viewing. All in all, the contract was fairly straightforward. In exchange for the ability to expand upon and pass on his abilities to his descendants, Yawatch had agreed that all spirits killed by Quincy arrows and techniques would be sent to hell. In addition, Yawatch would not be able to die of old age. Either party could terminate the contract at any time without consequence. Urahara hummed thoughtfully upon noticing that. "What is it?" Urahara pointed out the relevant lines. "It's surprising that your ancestor managed to get Hell to agree to such a condition." "Well, I imagine Hell was hardly in a negotiating position at the time," Ishida muttered. "He would have taken the help he could get, no matter how long it lasted." "True, and it would have allowed Hell to go after Yawatch when he regained power," the scientist murmured. "The question is what is meant by without consequence. Would Yawatch's descendants still retain Quincy abilities? Or not? There's really no way to tell," Ishida replied. "It depends on how much of our powers are bound to the contract. If the powers were given, then we might keep them. If they powers are, for lack of a better word, loaned from Yawatch through the power of the contract, then we might lose them." Inoue looked at Ishida in quiet concern. Would he be okay if his powers were taken away again, maybe permanently? He's acting so, calm about the possibility. Her lips twisted into a slight frown. Then again, what choice does he have? Unknowing of Inoue's thoughts, Shinigami and Quincy took a closer look at the passage in question. All descendants of the undersigned shall inherit the potential to utilize Quincy abilities, Urahara read slowly. I'm inclined to believe that you would retain your abilities, Ishida-kun, simply for the idea of inheritance. If it had specified that all descendants could use Yawacha's power, then I'd be more concerned. Ishida nodded thoughtfully, agreeing with the statement. Yawacha's power existed prior to the contract formation, so the power is not hell-based in origin. In addition, my soul is accustomed to Quincy techniques. Even if it was being aided by the contract before, I should still be able to use them. However, any descendants of my own may not inherit the Quincy powers. Is that a problem? Urahara asked lightly, though his eyes flicked to inspect the young Quincy. No. I would be content to be the last Quincy, Ishida decided after a moment. If my children are not spiritually aware, then they have little to fear from hollows. If they develop powers of their own, then perhaps Soul Society will look lightly upon them if they are not Quincy. After all, there is precedent. Apparently satisfied, Urahara moved his attention back to the contract. Ah, yes. Sato-kun and Inoue-chan. Exactly. Urahara turned off the screen and turned to Ishida. Shall we destroy the contract now, then? Ishida stiffened slightly. I'd rather wait until the conflict with Hell is over. Why? There are a few reasons. First, this Yawach, he would almost certainly detect the destruction of the contract. I have no wish to attract his attention. Urahara's eyes sharpened. Do you know something about him? Only what is known in Quincy folklore. He's known as the Sealed King. Approximately 1,000 years ago, he attacked Soul Society and was sealed away. The folklore states that after 900 years of being sealed, he would regain his pulse. After 90 more, his intellect. 9 years later, he would absorb the power of every impure Quincy. Ishida's eyes were hard flints. I believe Yawach has already done that. It's how my mother died, several years ago. He has likely been preparing for war ever since. I assumed that the Shinigami were already aware of him. There was silence for almost a minute as Urahara processed the information. I see. Do you understand that I don't want to make him move earlier than we have to? We cannot afford to split our attentions further, Ishida stated coldly. Especially as Soul Society is currently cut off from the living world until you finish moving the Dainai. Yes, you've made your point. The scientist sounded almost distracted. Fine, we'll keep the contract here for the moment. Please leave me, I have much work to do. Nodding, Ishida turned on his heel and left. Inoue followed a step behind. They walked in silence for a few minutes, leaving Urahara's shop. Finally, Ishida was unable to take the tension. Is something bothering you, Oriheim? Inoue bit her lip. I know you don't like Shinigami, Yuryu, but are you going to join Yawach when he does attack? Ishida's eyes clouded and he looked down. I don't know. I know that not all Shinigami are evil, but every time I think of Soul Society, I think of Kuratsuchi and his evils. I think of Yamamoto and how he permits people like Kuratsuchi and Kenpachi to be in charge of their own divisions, able to torture and destroy as they please without consequence. I think of the corruption of the Soul Society's government, I think of the nobles in Soul Society and how they effectively got away with kidnapping Kurosaki's mother. I think of how they relied on Kurosaki to kill Aizen. And I can't help but wonder whether it would be better for Yawach to take over. But that doesn't matter right now, Ishida continued, lifting his head. Right now, we have to deal with Hell. Even if I join Yawach in the future, I still want that contract destroyed. No innocent deserves Hell. Let's get something to eat, and then we can go train. There's too much. Urahara rubbed his temples, fighting the migraine. There was so much to do, so much to consider. Too much. He was hard at work shifting the Dainai, taking breaks only to alleviate the headache that inevitably came from trying to shift a dimension. Part of his mind still boggled at the idea. Another part, the part that giddily liked to show off and push the realms of science, reveled in it. Regardless of his own enjoyment, there was only so much his poor brain could take when he constantly fed it streams of data regarding the Dainai. While the 12th Division was actually doing the work, exerting pressure on the dimension's outer and inner borders, it was largely up to Urahara to determine the precise points that would yield maximum effect in the shortest amount of time. Mayuri, tasked with developing anti-Togabito measures, simply didn't have the time to dedicate to the project, though he always insisted on reviewing Urahara's work before approving it. Urahara didn't mind at all, he'd rather Mayuri have the temporary satisfaction of being able to gloat at him, instead of having all their efforts fail because he miscalculated. And it would be he who miscalculated. The Dainai was spatially and temporally isolated. Time worked very strangely there, and as a result even Urahara's computers couldn't consistently predict how the Dainai would shift. Additionally, the Kotatsu had apparently been repaired from when Aizen had destroyed it. Or perhaps it had regenerated. Or perhaps the Dainai had spawned a new one. Or maybe it was the same Kotatsu that Aizen had destroyed, using its time distortion effect to appear from a previous point in its own timeline. The inner workings of the Dainai wasn't Urahara's specialty, and at this point he really had no time to research it. In any case, the Kotatsu was back. And with it, exerting pressure on any point in the Dainai could have a variety of effects. The Dainai could respond the way it was supposed to, and shift slightly in the desired direction. Or it could do the opposite due to a reversal of cause and effect caused by time distortion. The pressure on the outside would be interpreted as the effect of the Dainai growing in that area, the Dainai rewriting time in that area to ensure causality was maintained. Or it could do nothing at all. Or it could shift sideways, closer to either the living world or soul society, or neither. Urahara's computers couldn't keep up with the shifting instability of the Dainai and how time flowed in strange directions. They helped, certainly, but ultimately it was up to Urahara. The Dainai was simply too big and too unstable to test it all at once. He had to look at the Dainai in real time, continually approximate the points that he thought looked promising, let the computers run their calculations for the points and surrounding areas, verify the results through his own calculations, and send the results to the 12th Division. And it had to be done quickly, as his results were valid for a damnably short PRD of time, between 1 and 3 hours. And for every point in the Dainai, the calculations differed only slightly but unpredictably because of that med-time distortion. It was enough to drive a man insane. Just thinking about it reminded Urahara about his headache. He'd been glad to get a brief reprieve when Ichigo-kun had dropped in, even if the boy did raise more questions that he had no time to try to answer. Why had Ulquiorra called him Kurosaki-sama? Stranger still, why had the young man not even reacted to the honorific? Everything that Urahara knew about him indicated that he had issues with giving or receiving that much respect to anyone. It might have been that there was no time or that it simply wasn't worth his attention. Ulquiorra had stated that Togabito were invading. Urahara frowned unhappily. He didn't have time to investigate that mystery. With some conscious effort, he banished it from his mind. There was too much to do. In addition to being largely in charge of the Dainai operation, he was also the living world's unofficial leader against Hell. He was the one who gave the information on where Togabito appeared, and he was the one who directed who went where. He was the one who decided that the hollowified Vizard should be held in reserve. And now there was this Yawatch threat on the horizon. Did Yamamoto know? Urahara groaned in frustration. There was too much on his plate. Urahara sighed and sat in his chair. There was little choice, despite how stressed he was. It didn't matter how tired he was, or how much he just wanted to rest. There was no one else. No one else had the intelligence and background needed to spearhead the Dainai operation. Wait. Urahara realized. While I have to work on the Dainai, there's nothing preventing a former captain from taking over the Hell Resistance. And I know just the one to ask. Oh Yoruchi. Ichigo blinked. All around him were people that he knew were illusions. In fact, he saw a few versions of himself in the crowd. Oh come on. An illusion-type Zanpakuto, he asked disbelievingly. Didn't we have enough of that with Aizen? I know, right? Zenai agreed. I kinda expected hell to have some superpowered element type. But once you know the truth about Asahi no Kagami, it makes a lot more sense. You see, Asahi no Kagami's power is a lot more straightforward. It forces the opponent to see the truth about themselves. The devastating, unadulterated truth. So what? The Togabito smiled. The truth is a terrible, terrible thing when one of the most powerful tools a human has is the ability to lie to himself. I can't see what you see, Ichigo. All I see is you. Everyone you see besides you and me are illusions, but they are your illusions. Now come on, Ichigo. Let's go. Ichigo raised Zangetsu to block an incoming strike from Zenai, only to leap back to avoid a secondary swipe from Asahi no Kagami. He didn't manage to evade it entirely though, his chest had been grazed. With a grunt, he channeled the vestiges of hollow power that existed in his base form to the area to heal the slight wound. He couldn't afford any handicap with all these illusions making it difficult to track his opponent. For a moment, Ichigo considered bringing out the white Zangetsu to counter Zenai's 2 Zanpakuto, but the Vizard dismissed the idea. In Shikai, it only slowed him down, and he was far more accustomed to fighting with a single sword anyway. Well then, time to take it up a notch. Bankai. Black Ryatsu enveloped Ichigo entirely for a brief few seconds before it died down, revealing his Bankai form. Ichigo held Tensa Zangetsu at the ready, quietly charging a Getsuga. You feel powerful like this, a pale illusory Tatsuki whispered, stepping forward from the crowd of illusions. Blood slowly leaked from a superficial cut to her forehead, a cut that Ichigo himself had made so long ago to prove a point. You like to feel powerful. It distracts you from knowing exactly how weak you are. Ichigo's eyes widened. That comment actually hurt worse than he expected. He knew it wasn't really Tatsuki who had said it, but the illusion had stabbed at the heart of his reasons to gain power. It's true, agreed another illusion, this one of a bully that he'd beaten up on Kigo's behalf right as they'd entered high school. You didn't even know Kigo. You didn't care for him. You fought me not to protect him, but because you wanted to prove your strength, to prove you're not weak. Ichigo grimaced, just before Zenai materialized right behind him. Don't get distracted. Zenai rebuked, swinging both swords down. Ichigo narrowly blocked with Tensa Zangetsu before spinning and kicking Zenai away, where he disappeared into the crowd of illusions. He prepared to give chase, but then a tearful Inoue jumped in the way. You hurt everyone. Around you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sato-kun, Tatsuki, Asano-san, Kojima-san, me. How many people have you forced to become involved in the spirit world simply by being around them, by making them spiritually aware? We were so much happier not knowing. Just by living, you're forcing more and more people to abandon their lives. Why, Kurosaki-kun? Why must you be so selfish? Because I want to live too. Ichigo answered tightly, his heart aching. He knew that it was his own fault that everyone had gained spiritual awareness. He simply hadn't had the control needed to keep from affecting the people around him. I didn't mean for that to happen, and I'm trying to stop. I've got a lot better control now, and while I'm in my body hardly any of my Ryatsu comes out now. I wonder who you're talking to. Zenai wondered aloud with a wicked smile as he dashed right through Inoue and forced Ichigo on the defensive. Tensa Zangetsu clashed against Zangetsu and Asahi no Kagami repeatedly before Ichigo grit his teeth and fired a silent Getsuga Tensho to force Zenai away. The truth hurts, doesn't it? The Togabito inquired with a smile before vanishing once more into the crowd. Shut up. She's right, you know. A white-clad Rukia murmured from the side. She wore the outfit that she'd had while imprisoned in Soul Society, awaiting execution. Everyone who becomes your friend gets hurt. I wanted to break the rules and give you half of my power, but you took it all. When I couldn't return to Soul Society, I was sentenced to execution. And when you came in to rescue me, Ishida-san lost his powers, Sato-san almost died, you kidnapped Yamada-san and almost got him killed. Renji joined you and was almost killed by Nisama. How are you able to live with yourself? Ichigo resisted the urge to clench his eyes shut. He knew that. He had felt so very guilty about it all, but it had all worked out. He'd had a chance to talk to everyone before they'd left Soul Society, and no one had blamed him. Ishida had been frustrated by the loss of his powers, but was grateful he knew the truth about his grandfather. Renji was just glad that Rukia was alive, and had smacked Ichigo upside the head for beginning to fumble through an apology for almost getting him killed. He'd made the decision himself to try to rescue Rukia, and he'd finally gotten his Taicho to acknowledge him. Yamada had understood and held no ill will, he'd wanted to rescue Rukia as well, and being kidnapped by Ichigo and Ganju had simply helped give him the courage to do so. Chad, loyal Chad had reminded Ichigo of their promise to each other, to always watch each other's back. He had claimed that no apology had been needed. As if summoned by Ichigo's thoughts, an illusion of Chad emerged from the crowd, his face blank but his eyes accusing. Have you even tried to uphold that promise lately? Chad rumbled, his voice filled with a quiet disappointment. When was the last time we fought together? When was the last time I actually needed your help, and got it? When was the last time you helped me get stronger? Ichigo couldn't help but flinch. The fake Chad was absolutely right. Chad had fought Okuiora alone, and fallen. And it was only when he'd fallen that Ichigo took up the fight. They hadn't fought together in a long time. And the last time that they'd trained together was in Urahara's basement in those free-for-alls, before Chad had ventured alone into Soul Society to find his abuelo. Even now, Chad fought alone in the living world. Keep your head in the game, Ichigo. Zenai warned, startling Ichigo out of his thoughts and back into the fight. Ichigo flickered away from an incoming Getsuga with Shunpa, trying to refocus. Asahi no Kagami, he whispered. DMN, but that's effective. Yep. Ichigo Shunpa'd away just before a Getsuga-enhanced Zangetsu cleaved down right where he'd stood a second before. Yet he couldn't escape the ghosts that Asahi no Kagami had summoned. The world has no place for a transcendent wizard, an illusory Zangetsu murmured. Even by simply existing, you destroy any possibility for peace. Ichigo winced, that was a painful thought, but worse still he couldn't argue it. Aizen had arranged for the Grand Fisher to kill his mother so that Ichigo could grow stronger. Gangs fought him because of his natural hair color. The Barine had kidnapped his mother to control his power. Hell itself was resurrected because of him. That's not all my fault, though, he said quietly. It's because they're afraid of me. Yes, but why are they afraid of you? An image of Cazador in full resurrection asked pointedly, his stance relaxed but his mouth quirked in a knowing smirk. My power, the wizard answered at once, gazing without hesitation into Cazador's eyes. More than that, King. They fear that your power will be used against them. Are they really so wrong? Ichigo froze. What? He whispered. An illusion of Zenai materialized next to Ichigo's other inner spirits. You said it yourself, Ichigo. A monster is someone who does terrible things because he enjoys it. How many times have you threatened someone and enjoyed the thrill of power? How many times have you thought about what I said when we first fought, and wondered if my way just might work? How many times have you been tempted? How many times have you had to remind yourself that people you don't know have worth too? Zangetsu asked quietly. You have fallen far from when you realized that protecting life was more important than honor, pride, and your word. Ichigo did close his eyes then. This was too cruel. Was he really a monster at heart? I know that I'm not perfect, he whispered. I make a lot of mistakes, and I know I have my problems. But I don't think that I'm a monster. You honestly believe so? You have forgotten what being a hollow means. Zangetsu roared. They consume souls for survival. And yet you enjoy their company and completely ignore the atrocities they commit outside your vision. You only banished the Minos from Karakura. Cazador pointed out with a terrible scowl. You don't even care if they visit other places in the living world, as long as they leave your home alone. That's not a lack of thought, that's just pure apathy. And it's not a large jump from apathy is participation, Zenai finished. Soon, Ichigo, even you won't be able to deny that you are becoming a monster. Ichigo fought the moisture that threatened to collect in his eyes. They were right. He hadn't even thought about everywhere else in the world. He had only concerned himself with Karakura's safety. Arrancar are different. Some of them just want to live in peace. Like Neliel, or Stark. Arrancar are hollows, and hollows need to be purified, another voice boomed, and Ichigo turned to see Yamamoto, Ryujin Jaka released and fire raging around him but not touching anything. You are a fool, Kurosaki Ichigo. What soul would desire to be a hollow? How can you look at the hollows you call friends and not remember that there are dozens, hundreds, thousands of other souls inside each one of them? Don't those souls deserve release? Aizen, from before his evolutions, stepped forward to stand next to Yamamoto. Where is your righteous anger? He murmured. In order to protect the 100,000 souls of Karakura and Soul Society, you struck me down. Are 100,000 souls consumed by hollows not worth the same? Guilt flooded Ichigo's mind. He'd known. He'd known that all the Arrancar had once been powerful hollows, but he'd avoided thinking about the implications. All those souls, trapped, waiting for release. Why hadn't he just purified every hollow, every Arrancar? He had so much power. Didn't that mean he had the responsibility to use it? Wasn't it his duty as a Shinigami to purify hollows and relieve them of their endless hunger for souls? And yet, Ichigo knew there had been a reason. He'd had a reason not to go on a purifying rampage in Hueco Mundo, beyond that of needing their power for this war against Hell. Why couldn't he remember? It had seemed so obvious before, but now he couldn't seem to think clearly. Then an echo of Kurosaki Isshin manifested, distracting Ichigo from his thoughts. With all your power, why couldn't you protect your sisters? Your mother? You were just useless after all. You can't protect anyone. That struck a chord in Ichigo's soul, awakening a set of memories that dispelled the other emotions that distracted him from the truth. Isshin was smoking a cigarette at Masaki's grave. Live well, age well, and go bald well. And die after me. And, if you can, die smiling. If I can't, I won't be able to face Masaki. Isshin was in the living room after the battle with Aizen. Ichigo, I'm proud of you. You were put into an impossible position that no man should ever be placed in, and you found an answer you can live with without regret. Isshin was hugging him tightly, despite Ichigo having failed to save Masaki. Damn Ichigo, you're not supposed to be this wise yet. Soon I really won't have anything left to teach you. No matter what else was true, Ichigo knew that his father loved him and was proud of him. That was his truth. This illusion was a lie. And just like that, Ichigo came to his senses. Shut up, he screamed, and there was blessed silence for several seconds. None of you are real. I should have known from what Zenai said, and from how every one of you knows exactly how to hurt me the most. All of you are just illusions, projecting my own private fears and feelings onto the most likely people to say those things to me. You wanted to reveal the truth, Asahi no Kagami. Ichigo yelled, unable to see Zenai but knowing that he and by extension Hell's Zanpakuto was listening. Then hear my truth. I am Kurosaki Ichigo. I know that since I have all this power, I have a lot of responsibility. And I know that I've made a lot of mistakes. And I'm grateful for having some of them pointed out. But I am not a god, he called out strongly. I am a human being. Making mistakes and learning from them is how we grow. Then answer us, the image of Rukia replied. Answer your feelings and see the truth for what it is. Fine. Then in reverse order. The wizard glared at the image of his father. I know I haven't been much success at protecting, but I'd like to see someone do better in my position. I'm doing my best and we both DMN well know it. Ichigo stared at Aizen with determination. My anger is still here. But it's not my right to judge other beings for what they did for survival. You tried to sacrifice my town for your own bloody purposes. The souls within hollows will eventually return to the cycle, whether their purification is in the next minute or centuries from now. He whirled on Yamamoto. I remember that those souls are inside hollows, but you tell me why you haven't set up hollow hunting missions. All that I've heard is reactionary. Stationing Shinigami in the living world to handle newborn hollows. Why haven't you hunted in Hueco Mundo to purify hollows if they are such abominations? You're the most powerful Shinigami in Soul Society, and you've got some DMN strong Taicho. Hell, I bet Kenpachi and his division would be overjoyed to go hollow hunting, and it would keep him from wrecking the 11th Division barracks so often. You're not stupid, you have to have thought of that before. But you haven't done that, and you won't, Ichigo stated firmly. I'm not stupid either. The balance of the worlds has to be preserved. Hueco Mundo, home of the hollows, lies in the balance with the living world and Soul Society. It would only do more damage to purify every hollow I come across in Hueco Mundo. Ichigo spun on the three illusions of his inner spirits. And I am not a monster. It's only natural for a human to care about what's in front of him more than what he can't see. I make mistakes, but I do my DMN best to fix them and keep from repeating them. That's what it means to grow as a person. The real versions of you understand that. Turning to Chad, he lowered his voice. I haven't been there as much as I like, but I have faith that the real Chad understands. I'll make it up to him later. His eyes were significantly harder when he turned to Rukia and Inoue, who stood together. I know my powers played a part in giving everyone spiritual awareness, but they made the choice to join me. I forced no one, their decisions are their own, and I will not take responsibility for them. Finally, he cast his eyes towards Tatsuki and the bully whose name he couldn't remember. I know that I was, and sometimes still am, weak. And yes, I do take comfort in feeling powerful. But just because that's true doesn't mean that I'm going to abuse my power. He narrowed his gaze to the martial artist who'd been his friend for as long as he could remember. You knew that when I beat you all those years ago. You knew that when I gave you that cut. As he finished speaking to each of the ghosts generated by Asahi no Kagami, each smiled and faded, dispelled by Ichigo's resolve. As for the rest of you, the wizard snarled, go away, I have a fight to finish and people to protect. And just like that, Ichigo was alone in the desert. The real Zenai stood several dunes away, clapping his hands slowly. Nicely done, Ichigo. You BSTRD. Ichigo growled. I have no idea what you're talking about, Zenai confessed. Like I said, I don't know who you saw or what you heard, though I could probably make a few fairly accurate guesses. You needed the exposure to Asahi no Kagami's power if you hope to stand a chance against Hell. If he ever takes you seriously, then you needed to know how to counter it. Now then, shall we continue? Black Ryatsu surged around Ichigo, his face ugly with rage. No. I'm done with this. And in an instant, Tensa Zangetsu was suddenly stabbed through Zenai's throat, with an Ajucha's masked Ichigo leaning right up to Zenai's face. Go back to hell, Zenai. I know that you did what you needed to do. But I'm too angry to deal with you right now. Blood leaked around Tensa Zangetsu as Zenai gave a very wet gurgling chuckle. Think about. He spat out some blood. Me too, okay? Fine. Ichigo ripped out the blade, and Zenai fell to the floor, blood pooling in the sands for several seconds before the hell portal materialized underneath him, taking him away. Taking off the mask and reverting to his Shirkai form, Ichigo grit his teeth angrily, turned on his heel, and began to Shunpa back to Las Noches. He had a war to win. Chapter 66, Motivation. That went well. Zenai gasped as he crawled out of the lava pool back in hell, but little could stop his sense of supreme satisfaction. Indeed it did, Asahi no Kagami agreed lightly. I was able to fulfill my own goal while there. I don't suppose you're going to tell me what it was? No. I thought not. So, you have failed. Did you not use my Zanpakuto? Zenai got to his feet unsteadily, absently noting that his clothes too had been restored. No, I did. Asahi no Kagami was doing her magic, and he was getting more and more distracted. But he managed to see me and put his bankai through my throat. He rubbed his neck absently at the memory, trying to banish the phantom pain. The wonderful thing about the truth was that it could be twisted so beautifully to say something else without ever lying. After all, Ichigo had seen him, just after he'd dispelled Asahi no Kagami. Hell did not look amused. And why did you not kill him while he was distracted? Zenai shook his head. Couldn't. I tried a few times, but Ichigo's bankai is more than just his sword. His speed and reflexes are enhanced too. He consistently saw or heard me coming and was always able to react in time. So I decided to let Asahi no Kagami really work him over first, to wear him down without distraction. I almost had him, too. And again, all true. Hell inspected Zenai's face carefully, before giving a short nod. You were far closer than any other Togabito, he admitted. I am simply disappointed that Kurosaki Ichigo is now aware of my Zanpakuto's ability. Tell me, how was he handling its effects? He was definitely shaken, Zenai assured him. I saw and heard him talking to himself. Stuff about being a monster, and arguing about why he wasn't purifying every hollow he saw. Hell smiled. Excellent. Those are powerful doubts, and should prove very distracting to him, especially as both sides of those arguments can be very compelling. He turned and began to walk away. Walk with me, Zenai. The Togabito did as he was bid, keeping a half step behind and to Hell's left. Is she still all right? He asked, being purposely vague just in case anyone else was listening. She's fine, Hell replied calmly. It simply occurred to me that you don't have a power to counter Kurosaki's bankai. I could try to master Asahi no Kagami and earn her bankai, Zenai offered. Hell shook his head negatively. No, that will take too long. I have an alternative. Zenai followed Hell in silence for almost half an hour, until it became apparent that they were heading for a large cave in a section of the cliffs. Hell-sama. I'm sensing something strange. Oh. Hell sounded amused. Tell me. It's like your Ryatsu has a very strong concentration in that cave. But that shouldn't be, since your Ryatsu is spread relatively evenly throughout your dimension, except for you yourself. Is there another you in there? You could say that. Zenai blinked, then shivered. One hell was bad enough. A second would be catastrophic. How was Ichigo supposed to beat two when just one outclassed him so badly? Come. I grow impatient with mere walking. Without warning, Hell spun around, grabbed his servant and threw him towards the cave at high velocity. Reacting by instinct, Zenai managed to use the airwalk technique to slow himself down just before entering the cave, landing easily. Hell was already there, of course. Zenai shivered again. That was a chilling display of casual power, to be able to move so fast, so easily. Come, Hell ordered again, and began walking down into the cave. Zenai followed him down a slope lit by torches for a few minutes before it opened up into a gigantic cavern with dozens of full cages. And in every cage was Kusanada. Zenai muttered. Of course. They're fragments of your soul, so having so many of them here gives them a similar spiritual presence. Yes, Hell confirmed. There are dozens, hundreds more on lower levels and in other caves. This is the task I've entrusted to my lieutenants from the last war, to gather the remaining pieces of my soul. Why not just eat them and return to your full power? Zenai asked with a sinking heart. Ichigo had such trouble with Hell now, how would he fare against Hell's true, full power? The thought has crossed my mind, the ruler agreed. But right now, it suits my purposes better this way. How, Hell-sama? Zenai made especially sure to give his voice a proper SBMSSV tone. Hell would likely respond better to that. Well, for one thing, it gives me a convenient way to grant power to certain people in my service. He smiled, then raised his voice. Hana. Open the cage nearest me. Hi, Hell-sama. The gate in question slid up, freeing the giant beast. The Kusanada immediately began to charge towards Hell, who did nothing but smile knowingly. And in a second it was all over. Hell had grabbed the Kusanada by the arm, pulled it down to his level and used his other hand to punch through the soul fragment's head. The body of the Kusanada began to glow and shrunk down to a purple orb, held in Hell's hand. He turned to Zenai, that same smile on his face, and then materialized Zenai's chains before shoving the orb into them. Zenai felt the influx of power wash over him and gasped as he felt it manifest. What did you just do?" he asked disbelievingly, inspecting his arms and chest. They seemed to have been covered by some kind of armor that seemed somewhere between white and gold in color. It also seemed to cover the top of his hands, and around his waist seemed to be a row of downward-pointing curved blades. He felt the armor with his hands, and noted that the armor seemed hard, smooth, but somehow flexible. He reached up and noted that it even covered all the way around his neck. "Are those skulls on my shoulders?" he demanded incredulously. He reached with right arm and felt the left shoulder. "They are." "Hell-sama, what did you do?" "I simply gave you what you needed in order to defeat Kurosaki Ichigo," Hell replied simply. "I bestowed on you the power from one of the fragments of my soul. With this, your synergy with Asahi no Kagami should increase significantly, and you should be able to keep up with Kurosaki's Bankai easily now." Zenai snapped his mouth shut, the implications whirling in his head. Hell had given him a portion of his soul's power. Could he? Hell laughed. "I see you're using your head, Zenai. Yes, this allows you some power over my chains, enough to break them or bind people with them as long as you are in my dimension. But know this, Zenai." His voice lowered, and his expression sobered enough for him to give Zenai a very, very dangerous smile. "If you break your mother free without due cause, you will take her place in chains and watch as I utterly destroy her. Her torment will last for eons before I give her the relief of oblivion." The Tagabito swallowed uneasily, his throat suddenly dry as the desert he'd just left. "Yes, Hell-sama." "Ichigo, what's going on?" Love demanded. Ichigo had just stormed into the training area, Ryatsu falling on the hollowified wizards hard enough to send Lisa and Hiyori to their hands and knees, gasping for air. Love himself was fighting the hollow instinct to run far, far away from this obviously very angry being. Ichigo's scowl deepened and the Ryatsu intensified, sending Love to the ground as well. Lisa and Hiyori now seemed unable to draw breath. "Hell set me off, that's what's going on." And then suddenly, the pressure was gone. All three of the Wizard Arankar shakily got to their feet, mercifully drawing in air. "Step up the training. The timetable's been moved up. In 3 days, Hell's going down." And with that, Ichigo turned on his heel and stormed out of the training room. Ulquiorra. The three ex-Shinigami turned to look at each other uneasily. 3 days? Hiyori asked incredulously. "How the F, does he plan to do that?" "Sealing," Lisa whispered in disbelief. "He plans on mastering a seal capable of holding Hell in 3 days. Guys, this is Ichigo," Love reminded them. "He's always performed best under pressure. I heard he gained Bankai with Urahara's training method, and it only took him 2 days. And our inner Shinigami all saw what happened when Aizen pushed his buttons. If Hell's made the same mistake." An echo of Ichigo's resurrection roared from within their memories, and all three of them shivered. "Kami-sama." Lisa breathed. "I take it back," Hiyori tried to say confidently, but her voice shook. "If he says he'll be ready, he'll be ready." Love turned around and went back to his training dummy. DMN, but Ichigo's a scary guy. No kidding. Okiura gave his master a report as he led Ichigo to the cells where they were keeping the Togabito. To a man, all of them had given no trouble at all as Okiura carefully removed their hellbinding chains. As a precaution, he decided to cut their chains all at once with the speed of Resurrección, Segunda Etapa and the power of Lanza del Relámpago, just outside of Las Noches. I apologize for not following your instructions to the letter. Okiura began. No, what you did was better, Ichigo approved. That gave Hell minimal time to realize what was going on. Did any of them get summoned back to Hell, or escape into the desert? No, Okiura informed. Excellent. Well done. Some of the prisoners have expressed a desire to join you. Ichigo slowly nodded. He hadn't considered that possibility, but it bore thinking about. I'll need to speak with them first. What's their average Ryatsu comparable to? A numero. Not quite fraction level. The wizard grunted acknowledgement. That's not very useful in combat except in groups. That explains why they focused so heavily on using Hell's chains. Kurosaki-sama, have you considered using these Togabito as test subjects for your seals? That's one of the reasons I wanted to see them. The other reason was to gauge who needs more security than the others. Okiura stopped in front of a door, and Ichigo paused for a moment to gather his thoughts before opening the door and stepping inside, closing the door behind him. It was a simple room, a bed, but nothing else. For all intents and purposes, this was a cell. Sitting on the bed was a woman. Ichigo's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. She looked in her late 20s or early 30s, he guessed. Her black hair reached her shoulders, though it looked like it had been a long time since it had been properly cared for. Even from where Ichigo stood, he could see that it was tangled and dirty. The woman looked at him uncertainly, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and anticipation even as she took in his appearance. You're Kurosaki Ichigo, aren't you? Yes. And you are? The woman smiled, and Ichigo blinked. Just smiling enacted such a transformation upon her face that it was clear that she'd once been a beautiful woman. Even her eyes looked hopeful. My name is Suki, Kurosaki-sama. No last name? Ichigo noted. Suki's smile dimmed. I'm afraid I've forgotten it. The wizard shook his head. No matter. He looked at her with a hard eye. You seem glad to see me. Oh, I am. Suki cried out, jumping to her feet. You're the one that Hell told us about, the one with the power to break our bonds, to cut our chains. I'm finally free of Hell. Please, Kurosaki-sama, can you send me on to the next afterlife? Soul Society, or directly into my next reincarnation? Anywhere but Hell again. Please. Ichigo took a moment to formulate a response to that. It was more than a bit odd having someone so obviously older than him showing him such reverential respect. Suki, I'm afraid we're in unexplored territory. I could use Kanso on you, but to my knowledge that technique only purifies you of sins performed after your death, not before. Where you go depends on your actions in life. I don't know if it takes into account any repenting you've done in death. Kanso could send you to Soul Society, or it could send you back to Hell. I really don't know, and I'm sorry for that. Suki's smile fell, and then her expression seemed to close itself off. I should have known, she whispered. Hell will never let us go. She shot a frustrated, almost angry look at Ichigo. Well. Get it over with. Get what over with? Use your Kanso, send me back to Hell, Suki bit out. Send me back so I can throw myself into the desert and let it take me. No. Ichigo barked, the memory of Shuren dissolving into sand at the forefront of his thoughts. What? I said no, the Transcendent repeated firmly. Just because I don't know the mechanics of Kanso doesn't mean that I don't know people who do. If a technique doesn't exist to judge if you've repented, then I'll get people started on creating one. Regardless, all Togabito captured be staying and lost no chase until Hell's defeated. With any luck, he'll drain his resources training more people, giving us the time we need to beat him. Suki stared at Ichigo open-mouthed. You really mean that, don't you? Mean what? The bit about making sure we're all judged properly. Yeah, why wouldn't I? Ichigo was promptly tackled, the ex-Togabito hugging him tightly. If the moisture gathering on his vest was any indication, she was crying as well. I will never understand women. Suki. Oh. Suki reluctantly let go and wiped her eyes. Sorry. I miss my children. I had begun to think I'd never get the chance to see them again. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'm so sorry. I just want to see my children again. I want it all to be over. I don't want to go back to hell. Ah. Ichigo understood. Without a word, he pulled Suki back into a hug, one she gratefully accepted. You'll see them again, someday, he assured her. How would you like to help me take hell down? Several minutes later, he stepped out of the room. Ulquiorra didn't seem to have moved a muscle. The former Espada said nothing, but Ichigo could hear the unspoken question. She's agreed to be my test subject. Come on, let's get to the next one. Heido 54, Heian. Rukia cried out, flinging a blast of purple energy into Sodi no Shirayuki's incoming Tsugi no Mai, Hakuren. The wave of cold air promptly collapsed as the heat of Rukia's fire spell destabilized the technique. Shir no Mai, Shirayuki. Sodi no Shirayuki dissipated into a cold whirlwind of snowflakes that quickly spread out to reduce its presence. Rukia silently charged up Heido 73, Soren Sokatsui, carefully observing her surroundings, waiting for the moment that her Zanpakuto would rematerialize. They had been fighting now for almost an hour, and Rukia had several light cuts from where Sodi no Shirayuki had managed to nick her with her blade. Thankfully, Rukia hadn't been caught in any of Shirayuki's dances yet. Then again, she hadn't even managed to land a single blow to her Zanpakuto. There. A rush of cold air had just brushed by her right arm. She leapt away just as Sodi no Shirayuki regained corporeal form and moved her hands forward. Heido 73, Soren Sokatsui, she yelled. Sum no Mai, Tsukishiro. The twin blasts of Rukia's spell crashed into an ice pillar that had manifested just in time to protect its user from one of the blasts, shattering the ice but obscuring both combatants of their opponent. My turn. Shir no Mai, Shirayuki, Rukia muttered the technique she'd practiced constantly lately. Now one with the cold air, Rukia's consciousness crept swiftly towards where she last saw her Zanpakuto spirit, only to find her apparently gone. Puzzled, she extended herself as widely as she dared. Sodi no Shirayuki had had the same thought, and they had ended up essentially switching positions. Ending the technique, Rukia coalesced back into her Shinigami form at the same time that Sodi no Shirayuki did. There was a warm smile on the Zanpakuto spirit's face, and Rukia grinned fiercely. San no Mai, Shirafune, she incanted quickly, dashing towards Sodi no Shirayuki, who readied to her own blade. Their blades clashed as they danced around each other, white ribbons flying through the air as neither managed to gain the upper hand over the other. Then Sodi no Shirayuki spotted an opening in Rukia's guard. She swung. Only to go right through empty air. Rukia reappeared right behind her Zanpakuto spirit, her blade pressing against her back. Shir no Mai, Shirayuki, the petite girl whispered, half in triumph, half in disbelief. I win. So you have. Sodi no Shirayuki stepped forward and turned around to look at her Shinigami with pride shining in her eyes. Well done, Rukia. How do you feel? I feel. Rukia couldn't seem to find the words as she sheathed her blade. My muscles ache, my hands hurt, but I've never felt as strong, as alive as I do now. How could you have possibly known that I had the potential for this? Shirayuki's smile softened as she came closer and pulled her into a hug. Silly Rukia. I've always known that within you was a core of strength. You just needed to find it. They stood in silence for a minute, before the Zanpakuto spirit broke the embrace and began walking towards the lake that they'd been training near. Come. Dance with me. Rukia's eyes lit up, and she practically chased her Zanpakuto spirit to the water, which froze over once more as they approached. Sodi no Shirayuki paused as she stepped onto the ice, and reached out her hand for her wielder. Rukia gladly took it. And as one, they pushed off. No words were exchanged as they glided across the frozen lake. None were needed. They danced and leapt and spun together, totally in sync with each other. Finally, Sodi no Shirayuki broke the silence. Rukia, do you feel it? The warmth of the cold, the blessings of the snow. Yes, she whispered back. The two of them spun, faster and faster in tighter and tighter spirals around the lake until they both came to a stop in the direct center. All winter is our domain, Rukia. Now is the time to take your place among it. Call forth our Bankai. Sodi no Shirayuki dissolved into snowflakes as her spirit returned to her wielder's heart. Rukia drew her blade and held it above her head as if she'd always known that this was white. Ribbon lengthening and spiraling around her body just like she'd always dreamed. Without thinking, acting by instinct alone, Rukia brought her left hand up in front of her face, forming a simple hand seal. Bankai. Amagai was not happy. Kumoi had called him in to let him know of his meeting with Kachiki Byakuya, and to tell Amagai of the new plan. To his consternation, it was both frustrating and relieving that the assassins would not be sent out again for some time. On the one hand, it was yet another reason to delay his righteous vengeance against Yamamoto. On the other hand, it eased his lingering feelings of responsibility and guilt about the prospect of betraying the people whose trust he'd won. "My, you look angry there," Kairaku's voice broke Amagai from his thoughts. Amagai almost jumped, but smiled sheepishly as Kairaku stepped out of a side street. "Sorry, just some bad news from a friend of mine." "Oh. I'm sorry to hear that." There was a pause, and then Kairaku spoke up again. "Would you mind some company tonight? I'd like to know how you're doing with your new division." "Sure," Amagai accepted easily. They began to walk at a slow pace down the street, and after a few moments, the 5th Division Taicho began to talk. "I think things are going as well as can be expected. Hinigami Fukuteicho and I get along decently well, I think. It's just going to take a bit of time for me to get to know everyone." "Of course. No conflicts, I hope." "Surprisingly, none," Amagai confirmed. "I thought for sure that some would reject me entirely because I came directly from the patrol corps, but that hasn't happened at all." "I'm glad," Kairaku commented warmly. "It's always nice when one's fears don't come to pass." He reached under his haori and pulled out a tall bottle. "Sake?" "Ah, no thanks," Amagai declined nervously. "Sorry, I've got no tolerance at all. 1 cup of sake and I'm out for hours." "Oh. That's a shame." Kairaku chuckled as he put the sake away. "Then again, I imagine it's also quite useful when you have trouble sleeping." Amagai laughed aloud. "My company in the patrol corps spiked my drink a few times while I was trying for Bankai. You tell me, does alcohol play well with a manifested fire element Zanpakuto spirit? I'm surprised it didn't make me spontaneously combust." The two of them laughed at that for a minute. "How are you handling Yamaji's assignment? It's an awful lot of responsibility for a new Taicho." The self-proclaimed lightweight shook his head. "I think I'm handling it all right. I've got a nice group of 4 different specialties in them all. Their teamwork needs some work, but they've got promise." Amagai glanced at Kairaku questioningly. "Tell me about Kurosaki. I've heard some from Soifun Taicho, but what I saw didn't exactly match up." "Hardly surprising. They have opposing mindsets," Kairaku explained. "Kurosaki Ichigo has a strong belief in doing what he feels is right and honorable, regardless of the consequences. He invaded Soul Society to rescue the Shinigami who gave him the power to save his family from hollows. He's also fairly intelligent, not genius level by any means, but he learns very quickly and draws reasonable conclusions from related information. Amagai hummed in acknowledgement. Much of what Kairaku had said had also been in the profile that Soifun had given him after becoming Taicho. He seems reasonable enough, he commented. Soifun Taicho seemed to think that he's a danger to Soul Society. As the leader of the Onmitsukido, Soifun has to prepare for any foreseeable event that could threaten Soul Society, Kairaku reminded him. I've no doubt that she has contingencies planned for if any of us turn traitor now. Her problem is that there really isn't a viable way for her to take out Kurosaki Ichigo without causing a civil war. That wouldn't be a problem if Ichigo-kun were demonstrably loyal to the Godei 13, the normally easygoing Taicho continued. But he is not. He is loyal to his friends and family. Soifun believes that he will eventually turn on us. To her credit, that's still very possible, he admitted. But you don't think it's likely? Kairaku grimaced. If you had asked before the Hell conflict started, I would have said unreservedly no. He just wanted to be left alone. But a noble family kidnapped his mother, and then sent her to Hell. Other decisions were made that I don't agree with. I hope Ichigo-kun doesn't turn on us, but I would understand if he did. I believe it all hangs on if Kurosaki Masaki can be saved. If her soul is rescued from Hell, then relations would be strained but we'd eventually be alright. If she's not. His head bowed and he fell silent. Amagai slumped. Then after Hell is finished, he will come to exact revenge on those who put her in that position in the first place, and we go to war to silence a threat we created ourselves, he finished grimly. Let us hope it does not come to that. Ichigo and Suki sat in the training room while Ichigo inspected her right wrist. While he had located the Ryatsu vent, he was having trouble pushing his own Ryuryoku back into the vent. Maybe you're just not using enough power. Suki suggested. You did tell me that sealing is very difficult. Maybe. The Ryatsu you naturally emit is enough to push mine away. I just don't want to hurt you by using too much at once, Ichigo admitted. I'm fine. I'll let you know if you're using too much. Nodding in agreement, Ichigo summoned up more of his power and channeled it through his right hand into his index finger, where he sent a sharp burst into Suki's wrist. Suki nearly jumped, startled by sudden sensation of his power inside her wrist. Well, you definitely made it in that time, she muttered. But Ichigo was too busy concentrating. He could only just sense the Ryuryoku he'd used, but it was a start. All right. Use your own Ryatsu to push it out, he instructed. She did so with little effort, and the wizard nodded thoughtfully. His Ryuryoku had had no true purpose behind it, not shaped into a spell of any kind. They repeated the test with Suki's left wrist with the same results. All right. I'm going to try to bind your arms from moving, Ichigo warned. Seeing her nod, he pressed his index fingers against her wrists and shot an even larger burst of Ryuryoku into her Ryatsu vents, focusing on what the desired effect. His power swiftly spread through her arms up to her shoulders, overwhelming Suki's own Ryuryoku. Once it was there, Ichigo's Ryuryoku expanded to fill Suki's arm and stiffened. That feels weird, Suki admitted. She tried to move her arms, but they seemed frozen in place. I thought you said this was difficult. We haven't gotten to the difficult part yet. This is just the precursor, Ichigo explained, though privately pleased by his progress. That was basically me replicating a low-level binding spell, and that was while I had unhindered, direct access to the Ryatsu vents. The next step is seeing if I can do the same thing with my chains. Unfortunately, Ichigo's first attempt at using his chains to invade Suki's Ryuryoku failed miserably, as none of the links even got close to her wrists. The second was hardly any better, as the chains did hit the wrists, but then failed to wrap around her properly. It was a few hours later that Ichigo finally got the hang of simultaneously wrapping her up tightly and binding her. The Togabito rubbed her arms with a grimace as Ichigo released her again. She was starting to bruise from the repeated impact of the chains. Sorry, Ichigo apologized, noticing the pained expression on his training partner's face. Let's call it a night and pick up where we left off tomorrow. Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra appeared right behind him with a sonido. Yes, Kurosaki-sama. Please take Suki to her room and have Pesh fetch some dinner for her. Ichigo's stomach growled. And then some for me. I'll take it in my room. Hi, Kurosaki-sama. Suki-san, please come with me. Suki nodded and made her way to the errand car before pausing and turning to the wizard. You're going to win, she told him quietly. I can tell by your intensity. There's someone down there that hell's taken, isn't there? Ichigo hesitated, but nodded. Yes. You'll win, she repeated. I'm sure of it. And then she was led away. Ichigo took a deep breath and sighed heavily. He wasn't particularly tired, but the quiet rage that had stayed with him from his fight with Zenai was fading. Nodding to himself, he walked back to his room. It was empty when he got there, and Ichigo had a brief pang of disappointment. He'd half hoped that Nellio would be there. It would have been nice to talk to her a bit more, share what Asahi no Kagami had made him see and hear, maybe even try to put to words how he felt about Zenai. I suppose it doesn't matter. Ichigo set Zangetsu up on the sword mount and sat at the desk, setting his elbows down upon it and rubbing his forehead wearily. The words that Zenai had spat at him earlier echoed in his mind. You don't know what I am, do you? There's far more to me, Ichigo. And I can't tell you. Who am I? I should know who he is. Zenai is part of my soul. Why is he so hard to figure out? A knock on the door interrupted Ichigo's thoughts. Come in. Pesh walked in a moment later, carrying a tray of food and a bundle. Ichigo-sama. Your dinner is here, and your clothes are ready. Ah, thank you. Ichigo took the tray and laid it on the desk. Picking up the bundle, he opened it and laid the clothes on the bed. Perfect. Thanks, Pesh. No problem at all, Ichigo-sama. The thin errand car seemed to glow with pride before noticing Ichigo's distracted appearance. Is something the matter? Just a lot going on, and I'm trying to figure something out. Maybe I can help, Pesh offered. Ichigo was about to decline, but thought better of it. Maybe he was too close to the situation. Would a fresh perspective help? While he would prefer to figure Zenai out himself, this was no time for pride. Maybe you can, he allowed. Do you know what a Zanpakuto is? Of course I do. Pesh answered, sounding slightly insulted. I'm an errand car. Ichigo shook his head. Sorry, I phrased that badly. My Zanpakuto spirit, Zangetsu, has a personality of his own, separate but linked to mine. In essence, his personality is made up of the traits I associate with true strength of spirit. Pesh adopted a thinking pose. That makes sense, I guess. Because Zangetsu is an extension of your soul. Exactly, Ichigo confirmed. The same applies to my inner hollow, Cazador de la Luna. He's my instinct. Right, of course, Pesh agreed easily. What about it? The Tagabito version of myself, Zenai. Who is he? What traits of mine does he embody? The errand car hummed for a few seconds, pinning his head to the side pensively. Well, the Mordming traits, I would think, he guessed. Zangetsu is made of the traits that would allow a soul to become a Shinigami, right? And Cazador is made of your instinct, the most necessary part of hollows. So, following that logic, wouldn't Zenai be made of the parts of you that would make you a Tagabito? Yeah. Ichigo sighed. I'd made that connection. Pride, hate, rage. But he said there was a lot more to him. What else could DMN me? They were both silent, dinner forgotten, for so long that Ichigo was about to sigh and send the insect-like errand car away so he could get some rest. But he was stopped when Pesh jumped up excitedly. Wait a minute, he cried out in triumph. Sinning grievously sends souls to hell, right? Right. So, sinning is an action, Pesh concluded. Personality traits aren't actions. But they are the motivation behind those actions, the wizard finished. Of course. I've been looking at this the wrong way. I've been trying to figure out traits of mine were bad, instead of looking at what traits would motivate me to commit those sins. Pesh struck a ridiculous pose. Once again, the genius Pesh has demonstrated his unparalleled intellect. Ichigo tried, and failed, to hold back to a chuckle. Thanks, Pesh. Anytime, Ichigo-sama. He bounced through the open door easily, closing it. Even so, Ichigo could still hear him gloating to himself as Pesh walked away. Wait till Dondochaka hears about this. Ayumu and Akio stood upon the terrace once more, staring out at the sunset. I've been thinking, Ayumu said quietly. As always, Akio replied easily with a knowing smile. What about this time? The nature of the human soul. Deep thoughts indeed. Humans tend to group with like-minded people, people they can sympathize with. Yes. What are you thinking? Do you think that tendency persists on a soul level? How do you mean? Akio sounded a little interested. Ayumu took a breath, trying to organize his thoughts. I was just thinking. Hollows are drawn to Hueco Mundo naturally, even if no other hollow has shown them the way. Souls who need no purification are called to soul society even without a guide. What if souls are naturally pulled to go to the world that best suits them? What if the human soul naturally gravitates towards beings that are like them? Hollows to the hollows in Hueco Mundo, pluses to the souls in soul society. For once, Akio looked outright intrigued. That's a very interesting thought. It's worth testing. But how would we test it? We would need to create a world, then populate it with enough souls to create a presence that dead souls can identify with. How would we get that many souls to volunteer for this experiment, let alone ensure they all have the right common element? Akio smiled. This seems an excellent opportunity, my friend, to test your other theory at the same time. Segregation and rehabilitation of evil souls. Ayumu blinked, and then his eyes widened as he finally understood exactly what Akio was suggesting. Wow. You're serious? Yes. Akio turned to look at his longtime friend. I, too, tire of seeing the unjust continue to escape punishment for their crimes. The number of souls who succumb to temptation have been increasing disturbingly. Let us create your world for the sinners, so that they might be more thoroughly cleansed before returning to the rest of humanity. Even if your theory about soul gravitation proves false, then you could still rehabilitate the ones we discover to be evil. We're going to make a world, Ayumu whispered in awe. A world where people may repent for their evil. The good may continue to come here and live in the paradise they've earned, while the wicked are made to understand why they were wrong. Yes. But be warned, you cannot force people to see a better way, not when they blind themselves to the suffering of others. This new world may simply become a very large prison for those who refuse to be cleansed. Can you make peace with that knowledge? I'm not sure, Ayumu admitted. But I have to try. If I can turn their hearts, then maybe one day all the worlds will be at peace, and we can discover a way to grow without needing conflict to spark it. Akio smiled. Your name truly does suit you. Let us begin. Chapter 67, The End of Training. Ayumu followed his friend as they traveled deeper and deeper into the wilderness, far from any civilization. He wasn't even sure he could find his way back easily. So, tell me again why we're going this far out. Akio spread his arms, gesturing to his surroundings. As with everything spiritual, worlds of the spirit are made of Reisha as well. Ayumu nodded impatiently. Right, like Hueco Mundo and Soul Society. I get that part. But why are we here? In order to create a world, you must have a large quantity of Reisha to shape, Akio explained. When we actually create and stabilize the world, we will use the void between worlds, but you need practice. We don't want you passing out in the void and being lost forever. Ayumu swallowed and nodded, accepting the point. So, what do I do? Now you bring forth the world of your heart. Ayumu blinked. What? He asked flatly. Akio laughed. Did you think you could simply forge a world one piece at a time? No. Such a thing would be as weak as its weakest fragment. As soon as one piece collapsed, so too would the world. A true world springs into being all at once, and evolves from there. So how do I do it? How do I call up my world? You must achieve enlightenment, my friend. Akio smiled. It is the same as learning to call forth and work with your Zanpakuto spirit. Only those who have the will to try understanding their own feelings, the source of their strength, may wield the sword of their soul. This is why even the cowardly may find their sword spirit if they know themselves, why even the meek can wield unearthly power if they find a reason to stand their ground. I have brought you out here so that you might know yourself. True power is born of wisdom, and wisdom is born of understanding. You must reach true understanding of who you are, only that can grant you the power and ability to share the world of your heart. Ichigo opened his eyes, but did not make any move to leave the bed. That dream had been longer, more vivid, than those that came before. No, not a dream. A memory. Ayumu. Akio, they created the Hell Dimension. But then why did Hell go to war against Hueco Mundo and Soul Society? What changed? Was Ayumu killed, and someone else took over the dimension? Ichigo raised his right hand above his face to stare at it. The memories didn't start coming until Hell's Ryatsu invaded me and formed Zenai. Did that spark memories from a past life? Am I Ayumu's reincarnation? Did his soul go through the cycle until it became me? We're so similar. Is this the reason for my chain abilities? Was it passed down from Ayumu to me? Are my chains the same as the chains of hell? The wizard didn't know how to feel about it, and both Zangetsu and Kazador remained silent as he tried to wrap his mind around the idea and its implications. He continued to lie in bed for several minutes longer before realizing that he was wasting time. It doesn't matter if I am Ayumu's reincarnation or not. If I am, then it's my responsibility to set hell right once more. If I'm not, then I still need to do my best to set it right anyway. With that, he swung his legs out of bed and dressed in the clothes that Pesh had delivered the previous night before heading to the training room. His mind was preoccupied with the second half of the dream. The world of my heart, my inner world, we have the knowledge now on how to make a world. Yes. But it is not yet time. No, it's not. And we're not ready yet. True power is born of wisdom, and wisdom is born of understanding. I don't even understand Zenai yet. But I'm getting there. Maybe one day my dream will become a reality. For now, though. Hell must fall. Hidden in the shadows of a corner, Ulquiorra watched silently as his king entered the training grounds. His outfit had changed again, and for a moment he wondered if Kurosaki Ichigo's army would be expected to take up the uniform. Kurosaki had obviously modified the Arankar uniform in order to achieve this look, and even Ulquiorra could appreciate the symbolism present. The white hakama had 4 thick black lines placed on each leg, one on each side. The jacket, once completely white, had its right side dyed black. On its back was a pair of crescent moons, a black one on the white side, and a white crescent on the black side, with their tips forming a circle, mimicking Kurosaki-sama's power seal. Ulquiorra only understood on an intellectual level why Kurosaki Ichigo had sealed his own power. Kurosaki-sama had spoken of his power being too much for his human body, and therefore the power had to be contained. In addition, the difficulty in controlling such vast power made it impractical for rescuing Kurosaki Masaki. But why had Kurosaki-sama not released the seals, at least while in Hueco Mundo? Could he not see that the more power he displayed, the more respect he would garner from the hollows? Okurora's eyes emotionlessly followed Kurosaki-sama's training as he contemplated such thoughts. Perhaps the seal, too, was a form of training under a handicap so that when the seal was removed Kurosaki-sama would be truly unstoppable. Or perhaps the seal was an aid, allowing Kurosaki-sama better control over his power to accelerate his learning of sealing and Shinigami Kido. He gave the slightest of nods to himself. Yes, that made sense. Kurosaki-sama desired to rescue his mother. Hell was a problem, and according to the available information he could not be killed, therefore, sealing hell away was the only solution that would remove hell as a threat. Therefore, the fastest way to rescue Kurosaki Masaki was to seal hell, and Kurosaki-sama was leaving his power sealed to accelerate that process. But one question continued to burn in his mind. Kurosaki Masaki was a weakness, a very dire weakness. That was plain if even those fools, the Soul Society nobles, could see it and capitalize on it. When Kurosaki-sama plucked her out of Hell's grasp, how would he safeguard her? Soul Society was obviously unsafe in its current state of governing. Keeping her in Hueco Mundo was foolish, as the woman had no power and Hollows would have no compunction against attacking and perhaps consuming her. The living world had insufficient erasure in the air to sustain her. Therefore, the only solution was the complete annihilation of the threat. Would Kurosaki-sama invade Soul Society once again, and bring ruin to the nobles who had attacked him so, and then perhaps establish a stronghold to guard the woman, using promises of money or power? It seemed likely, from a logical perspective. But Okuiora knew that Kurosaki Ichigo did not rely exclusively on logic. If he had, then Masaki would have been discarded as an unfortunate loss. She had no power to speak of, not even capable of matching the weakest of Shinigami or Hollows. The woman was valuable only in sentiment. However, Okuiora noted, Kurosaki-sama was fairly intelligent. He had to have considered all of this as well. Okuiora's face reflected none of his thoughts as he made the decision. He would speak with Kurosaki-sama in private, and communicate his concerns. In order to implement Kurosaki-sama's plans, he had to know what they were, after all. In the meantime, Okuiora waited to be called upon. The best way to serve his king right now, was simply to be available should his liege need him. Chad's breathing slowly evened out as he watched another Togabito be SCKED into the swirling red portal back to hell. She's down. Good, Yoruchi's voice responded through the radio in his ear. There are no more Togabito in the living world at this time. That's the third wave of Togabito in as many hours. They've started coming much more frequently, Renji observed warily. But they don't seem to be increasing in strength. I agree, the unusually somber voice of Kurosaki Ishin concurred. Something's up. What's his game? There are only a few possibilities, the workcat assessed. Hell may want to wear us down, so he can crush us in a final assault. Or perhaps he's working another angle and is simply trying to keep us busy enough not to stop him. Chad grunted acknowledgement. How long until the Dangai is positioned? Ishida's voice queried. Approximately another 30 hours, Urahara's voice cut in. Ever since Yoruchi took over Togabito Watch, the Dangai work has accelerated rapidly. Chances are high that the Togabito will continue invading periodically until that time comes. Can you hold out that long, everyone? Yoruchi asked simply. I'm fine, Ishin agreed. Khan and I are taking turns to conserve our strength. We can handle it, Rukia volunteered for herself and Renji. There was a pause. I can continue for now, but Oriheim needs rest, Ishida finally stated. But I do not think I'll be capable of continuing for more than 4 or 5 hours before I too need rest. Acknowledged. Sado. Chad quietly took stock of his own Ryuryoku and physical state. It was a little low, and he was tiring. None of them had gotten much sleep, needing to handle the periodic attacks throughout the night. How much longer could he last? I can handle 2, perhaps 3 more hours if they continue to come hourly, Chad admitted. Yoruchi's voice held no judgment, good or ill. Very well. Effective immediately, we are starting rest rotation. We will be rotating every 4 hours. Sato, Inoue, go home and get some sleep. Hitsugaya will take Sato's place at the school. Sato and Inoue will relieve Ishida in 4 hours' time. The next cycle, Ishida will relieve Hitsugaya. Abarai and Kuchiki, Kurosaki and Kon, work out between yourselves who will rest first. The wizard shall remain on standby in case assistance is needed. Am I understood? Hi. With that, the line went dead. Yoruchi had turned off the transmission. Chad let out a quiet breath and waited for Hitsugaya to relieve him. His body ached for the warmth and comfort of bed. Looks like I'm going to miss school today. In truth, it didn't bother him over much. But still, Chad wondered how long it would last, how long until he had to make a choice between his life as a human student, and his other life as a fighter in the spirit world. It's just one situation after another. Rukia. Aizen, now hell. Chad cast his mind back to that day where he'd had his eyes opened. The strangely intelligent cockatiel, the soul of Shibata Yuichi, and the hollow, shrieker, no. Though that had been the beginning, his eyes hadn't truly opened to the world of spirits until he'd fought that hollow with Kurosaki Karen. That had been the first time he could see any spirits at all, the first time he'd awakened his power. It was also the day that he and Inoue had met with Urahara, and been given a choice. Your transformation is not a disease. You were just given the key to the door in front of you. There's no need to know the cause. No need for sorrow or sadness. What comes next is up to you. You can use your keys to open the door or lock it tight. And if you do choose to open it, that you can still decide not to pass through. Chad still remembered Urahara's words vividly, despite how much had happened between then and now. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen to open the door and step through it, to join Ichigo and have his back, as it was obvious that Ichigo was firmly entrenched there. And he'd been right. For all his life, Ichigo had been far more entrenched in the spiritual world than Chad had ever realized. Ichigo's father was a Shinigami. His mother, eaten by a hollow. Ichigo himself, a chess piece in the manipulations of Aizen, and then Ichigo became a Shinigami to save his family. Truly, there had been no choice for him, and so Chad could not turn his back. How could he, when each had sworn to always be there for the other, to fight for the other's sake even when they could not for themselves? But now, Chad knew it was only a matter of time before Ichigo went where Chad was unsure if he could or would follow. More and more, it seemed like Ichigo was losing touch with the real world, with his responsibilities as a human, giving higher priority to the spirits than to the living. Not that Chad could blame him, really. If Aizen had won, then everyone in Karakura would have perished. And now if Hell won, no realm would be safe, living or dead. It was only natural that Ichigo would immerse himself with the Shinigami and Hollows, to gain the power, to recruit the allies, needed to take down the threat to Karakura. But Ichigo didn't even think twice about leaving to Hueco Mundo to secure it from Hell. He had abandoned his school just like that, sabotaging his chances at living a successful, human life. He had abandoned his body and given it to Kon without any misgivings, authorizing the Mod Soul to use it to protect Ichigo's family. Why hadn't he gotten Urahara to build Konojigai? Ichigo's body could die. Did he really see his body as so expendable? Was Ichigo truly more at home in the realms of the dead? Maybe Chad was wrong. Maybe Ichigo just hadn't thought of it, or maybe there was something Chad didn't know. Maybe Ichigo had lent Kon his body as a sign of trust, to garner feelings of loyalty from the Mod Soul. Maybe he'd done it to prevent Soul Society from asking too many questions about a new spiritual fighter. Maybe Ichigo truly did value his human existence. Chad hoped so with all his heart. And so when Hitsugaya arrived and gave him a short nod, Chad walked silently home, praying that when it was all over, Ichigo would prove him wrong and truly try to live as a human. Amagai watched his team with pride. The four of them were holding up against Ikaku much better than they had the previous day. Instead of relying purely on the strength of his Shirkai and attempting to beat Ichigo at the stronger Shinigami's own game, Hay-8 was instead being cautious and acting as a shield, jumping in at the last second to deflect and defend against Ichigo's attacks before backing off. Amagai approved, it conserved Hay-8's energy while allowing him to protect the more vulnerable Kido specialists. Instead, it was Daiki who kept the majority of Ichigo's attention, landing small blows here and there. Every opening that Ichigo tried to take advantage of, Hay-8 Shunpaed in front of and blocked with Kodaku no Kishi, giving Daiki the time needed to recover and rejoin the fight. Amagai was quite glad that the two swordsmen had given each other some tips on their respective specialties. Hay-8 Shunpa was still rough, but it was better than before and allowed him to defend his teammates at a moment's notice. At the same time, Daiki's Zenjutsu had improved, leaving fewer openings. He smiled. They were a good team. The Taicho barely held in a laugh as Ichigo tried to attack Chinatsu to interrupt her Bakudo incantation, only to be stopped in his tracks by Hay-8 again. Ichigo's expression was immensely frustrated, and only grew more so as Chinatsu finished her incantation and promptly cast Bakudo 21, Sekienten. The red smoke obscured everyone's vision while Hay-8 grabbed Chinatsu and Shunpaed away. Ichigo growled as he stomped out of the smoke. "Oh come on," he cried out in irritation. "Are these delaying tactics all you're good at?" "Not at all," said another voice from within the smoke, a voice belonging to someone who hadn't been there a moment before. Ichigo whirled around, but he not quite fast enough to avoid what was coming next. Heido 61, Soren Sokatsui. The gigantic blue blast erupted from within the smoke, and when it faded Ichigo was on one knee next to the far wall, his chest and arms burned heavily. "Ow," he commented. "Looks like I was right. You do pack a punch with that spell." The smoke cleared, revealing Haku and Daiki, who had taken advantage of the smokescreen to Shunpa Haku inside it. The Heido practitioner smirked for only a moment before beginning to chant once again, but he fell quiet when he felt Ichigo's Ryatsu rise. The 11th Division member got to his feet. "Looks like I have to take you guys seriously now," he said lightly as a red aura manifested around him. "Who would have thought you ragtag bunch could push me this far? Come on then, and have a taste of real power." Bankai. Ryuman Hozukimaru. Ichigo's power flared high, obscuring him for a moment before revealing his Bankai. This being the first time Amagai had seen the third seat's Bankai, he observed it critically before nodding. Yes, Ichigo was a perfect matchup against his team. Ichigo's Bankai powered up over time, giving the Togabito capture team an opponent whose difficulty scaled as needed. But for now, Amagai was looking to see who would come to their senses first, who would take the lead. He suspected it would be Hay-8. People without Shirkai tended to follow the leadership of those with, as it was a symbol of strength to rally around. He was right. Hay-8 shook his head, gritting his teeth as the others looked towards him for an answer. Right then, Hay-8 muttered. "Chinatsu, Haku, we need your best spells out here. Daiki and I will hold him off for as long as we can." "How?" "He's got that giant metal thing on his back, so I can't attack from behind, and there's no way my sword will hold up against the weapons he's got," Daiki pointed out. "Not alone, no," Hay-8 agreed. "But my Shirkai's pretty durable. I'll block, you attack. Same as last time." Daiki grimaced, but nodded. "Just a lot harder. You better hurry with those spells," he told the pair of Kido users, who nodded resolutely. "You guys done with your little pep talk yet?" Ichigo asked, rolling his eyes. "Come on." In answer, Daiki flickered into Shunpa, attempting to land a sneak attack on the third seat. Ichigo blocked it easily with the giant spade in his right hand before counterattacking with the guandao in his left. And suddenly, Hay-8 was there, blocking with Kodaku no Kishi. But Ichigo's strike was too powerful, it knocked him off his feet, into Daiki, and threw them both back a couple of dozen feet. "You fight a foe much stronger than yourself." "Why?" Hay-8 breathed heavily, getting to his feet. "Because I have to." "Why? Why must you fight?" Heiei readied his blade and glanced to his right, where Haku and Chinatsu were running away from Ichigo, still trying to get their incantations out. To get stronger, to be ready to fight the Togabito. That does not answer the question. Why must you fight? Why not someone else? Why not Kurosaki Ichigo, the man who gained the title Hell's Nightmare? Why not your Taicho, the man entrusted to protect you and your comrades? Why must it be you? Because everyone has a part to play in what's coming. Heiei glanced at Daiki and witnessed his own determination mirrored in the other boy's eyes. Without a word, they both shunpei'd directly in the way of Ikiku and attacked with identical vertical slashes, forcing the third seat to defend momentarily. I may not know their parts, but I'd be very foolish to think that they're doing nothing. I've been chosen to be part of the Togabito capture team. What we do could help end the war. It may not. Maybe, but we won't know unless we try. Heiei grunted as he was once again lifted off his feet and thrown into a wall from the force of Ikiku's counterattack. I do not want to fight a war against the Togabito, he admitted. But I don't think I could live with myself if anyone on my team dies because I selfishly chose to do nothing. So I have to get stronger. You choose to trust in your Taicho's leadership, to put your personal desires aside for the sake of doing what you can to defend your comrades. Yes. Kadaku no Kishi chuckled, a deep reverberating chuckle that resonated inside Heiei's soul. And you thought you weren't a knight? A selfless defender loyal to his liege, that is the very definition of a knight. Now stand, Heiei Dano. We fight together. Heiei stood again, barely noticing blood dripping down the side of his head, from the scrapes on his arms and legs. His body felt full of strength, his Ryuryoku boiling inside him. He didn't notice Amagai staring at him, or Ikiku suddenly turning in surprise. He couldn't see how silver Ryatsu swirled around him impressively. All he knew was that he and Kadaku no Kishi were in sync, acting in unison. Together, they raised the broadsword for Heiei to look through the eye-shaped holes. Now, Heiei Dano. Give the order. Target, Kadaku no Kishi. Ikiku was curious when the entirety of Heiei's eyes began to glow bright silver, but was startled when Heiei was suddenly there in front of him, attacking with a speed and fervor that Ikiku hadn't seen from him before. Ikiku blocked the strike with the giant spade, noting that Heiei had actually managed to chip it, just a bit. He countered by slashing with the guandao, but to his surprise, Heiei managed to block him, only skidding back a few inches from the impact. The boy then leapt at him once again, swinging even faster, and suddenly Ikiku found himself actually pressed to defend. This is ridiculous, kid. Ikiku complained. But then again, I've been holding back. After blocking another strike, Ikiku flickered into Shunpa and materialized behind Heiei, swinging both swords straight down upon him. Heiei spun and brought Kadaku no Kishi above him to defend, but the sheer power of Ikiku's Bankai overwhelmed his defense, forcing Kadaku no Kishi down and slicing into Heiei's shoulders. Bakudo 63, Seijo Sabaku. Chinatsu cried out. Sheet. While he'd focused on Heiei, he'd completely forgotten about the others. But it was too late for Ikiku, he was immediately wrapped up by glowing golden chains. Ikiku immediately began to struggle, and quickly found a weakness in the chains. The chains visibly stretched, and it was clear that they would not hold Ikiku for long. Hurry up. Daiki encouraged. Haku was still hurriedly muttering an incantation for another few seconds. Alright, I'm gonna be useless after this, he warned. Just hurry up and fire. Heido 88, Hiryu Gekizoku Shinten Reiho. Haku roared, and from his outstretched arms a gigantic beam of electrical and spiritual energy rocketed, tearing up the ground as it went, and completely enveloping Ikiku, knocking him through 2-3 walls. When the air cleared, Ikiku was on the ground, electrical burns all over his body. His Bankai had reverted to Shirkai, and he was struggling and failing to get up. Nice hit. Ikiku managed, giving Haku a shaky thumbs up, before falling unconscious. Amagai's mouth fell open as he watched Yamada provide first aid for the 11th Division member. How exactly had Haku learned such a powerful technique? And Chinatsu's Bakudo was impressive as well. They weren't kidding about Aizen finding some of the best men for his division, he muttered as he walked over the Heido user. Like Haku had predicted, he was on his knees, panting and completely drained of Ryuryoku. No matter, Yamato would take care of that after healing Ichigo and Heiate. Well then, he murmured to the boy. That was a nice technique. I'm impressed. Thanks, Amagai Taicho, Haku said. I can't do it more than once, though, even when my Ryuryoku is at their max. Even so, that's a very nice trump card. Where'd you learn it? Amagai extended his hand and pulled Haku to his feet. Aizen taught me, before he turned traitor, Haku admitted. He said that I was skilled enough with Kido I could have gone far in the Kido Corps, and wanted me to nurture that talent. So he tutored me on high-level Heido. He was talking to me about becoming 4th seat before he turned traitor. It was the same with me, Chinatsu interjected, though he wanted me to become 6th seat. Hinamori, who had remained silent for most of the practice, came up to them then. Aizen was a very good Taicho, wasn't he? Hi, he was, Haku admitted. I wish he hadn't turned traitor, Chinatsu agreed. Me too. But I think you and I will become good friends. He was training me in Kido as well. Maybe we could compare notes later. Haku and Chinatsu glanced at each other, then smiled. We'd like that, Chinatsu spoke for them. Amagai smiled as well, moving quietly away to Heiate, who was now being healed by Yamada. So, new technique, huh? Yeah, Heiate muttered. When Kodaku no Kishi targets someone, it's like tunnel vision and an incredible adrenaline boost. I couldn't really see anything except for Madarame-san and the ground between us, and it was like he was going slower than before. I felt so much stronger, too. Did I really block his Bankai alone? You did, Amagai confirmed, pride coloring his voice. It's a dangerous technique, though. Tunnel vision leaves you wide open to a sneak attack from a friend, and it keeps you from knowing where your allies are. You'll need to train in this technique to expand your awareness, but well done. With that, the Taicho strode over to Daiki, who seemed a bit upset. What's wrong? I just feel a bit useless, Daiki admitted. Haku and Chinatsu, they could actually do something against Madarame-san's Bankai. And Heiate, he was able to stand alone against it for a bit. But me? I couldn't do anything. To be fair, Ichigo's Bankai is particularly suited against your style of combat, Amagai told him. Daiki, you specialize in Ho-Ho, striking at openings and the sides. Ichigo's Bankai made it so you couldn't attack from the back, you couldn't strike at the sides, and attacking from the front is nearly suicide. That Bankai is meant to try to force people into his style of combat, one-on-one, in a straight-up duel. It's not so much you being useless, as it was Ichigo being able to counter you. With more experience, you'll be able to counter his counter. What would you suggest? Amagai's smile took a slightly more wicked turn. Remember, I served under Soifen Taicho. And Soifen Taicho learned Ho-Ho directly from the goddess of Flash herself, Shihoin Yoruchi. I'll be your teacher until it's time for your team to do its duty. Daiki swallowed nervously. He had a feeling this was going to SCK. Amagai stepped back and looked at his team. He cleared his voice and spoke loudly so they could all hear. You have done very well, and I'm proud of you, he announced. I declare the Tagabito capture team ready. You worked together, and successfully took down an opponent whose difficulty approaches Taicho class. Once the Dangai is stable, you will be sent to the living world with the following mission: capture a Tagabito, and bring it to the 12th division for analysis. The Taicho broke the solemn mood by smiling. Today, however, is your day to recover. Dinner tonight is on me. Congratulations, guys. Zenai. With a sigh, the Tagabito resealed Asahi no Kagami and sedately made his way to Masaki, who was still chained to the same wall he'd first seen her at. Her voice had been insistent, but unafraid, so he took his time entering the room. Yes. You fought Ichigo, didn't you? How is he? Zenai fought the urge to sigh again. This would be a long conversation, he could tell. So he pulled up a chair and sat. Yes, I fought him. He is still alive, and still determined to get you out. He smiled grimly, rubbing his throat absently from the phantom pain. He's growing stronger. Did you use Hell's Zanpakuto? Masaki's voice was quieter now, as though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Yes. Zenai eyed her carefully before coming to a decision. But I will not share his inner demons. They are his feelings to share, his secrets to keep. The only reason I told Hell about them was because I'm relatively certain he can still commune with Asahi no Kagami, and she has no reason not to tell him. Look who put on his thinking cap, Asahi taunted coolly. But yes, he can. He just chooses not to most of the time. I see. Masaki looked down for a few moments, then steadfastly met Zenai's gaze. Are you really going to kill him, to become one again? That depends entirely on Ichigo. If he lets me kill him, then yes. If he can kill me, then no. Curiosity welled up in his mother's eyes. Isn't it awkward, fighting with a reflection of yourself? The question was so unexpected, Zenai actually laughed. Yes, he admitted. Yes, it is. I still have Ichigo's memories of fighting his inner hollow. It's disturbing, fighting a shade of yourself that wears your face, knows everything you do, and is completely unafraid to take advantage of your every weakness. I'm sure he feels the same way fighting me now. But for me? Zenai shrugged. For me, it doesn't bother me a bit. Ichigo may be the wellspring from which I was born, but our fights serve a purpose. What purpose? Masaki pounced on the choice of words like a starving animal. Zenai smiled. To make him acknowledge the parts of himself that aren't as pretty as what he shows the world. Ichigo may strive to be a hero, he may be the most powerful hybrid in creation, he can be an all-around great guy, in public. But everyone's got a dark side. And the closer you are to the light, the longer and darker the shadows you cast. Take me for example, he continued, gesturing to himself carelessly. I've been part of Ichigo all his life. You could extrapolate a few things about me that say something about Ichigo's character. Even on a superficial level, you could tell that I despise having someone else have authority over me, until they've proven themselves to me. But that's a nasty little catch-22, isn't it? In order for them to earn it, they have to have authority, but I hate them having that authority until they earn it. And you know what? I don't care. It doesn't have to be logical. It's how I feel. Zenai smiled mirthlessly. Ichigo hates it too. Yamamoto hasn't proven himself to Ichigo, and so Ichigo quietly nurses his resentment every time the old man tries to give him an order. And now that Ichigo's as strong as the BSTRD, who knows what'll happen. But here's something to think about. Let's think about what would have happened if Rukia's punishment had been decided by Soul Society's lawmakers to something more reasonable, even for a human. How about, say, 5 to 7 years in prison? That's practically nothing to the lifetime of a Shinigami. A slap on the wrist. I bet Byakuya would have had her out in 3 years, tops, with some noble family bullshit. But you know what? Ichigo would have invaded Soul Society anyway. Because he wouldn't care that there could be perfectly valid reasons to make transferring your power to a human illegal. For all he knew, being a human with Shinigami powers could have drastically lowered his human lifespan, or maybe it causes problems with his soul re-entering the cycle of reincarnation or something. Or maybe it made him into the spiritual equivalent of an atomic bomb and his soul could explode anytime. Who knows? He certainly didn't. Wouldn't. Rukia have told him about any major consequences, though? Masaki jumped in. Even if she didn't say anything before she gave him her powers, if there was something dangerous about it then wouldn't she have called Soul Society to get some help, even if it meant her own punishment? She obviously cared for him. Zenai raised an eyebrow at her. Perhaps, he conceded. But then again, she did know it was forbidden. And neither I nor Ichigo have any idea as to why that is. In any case, the point is that all Ichigo would have seen, all he would have cared about, was that Rukia was being punished for breaking the law to help him save his family. It didn't matter if it was execution or imprisonment. So he would have gone to Soul Society and tried to enforce his own will, because to him it was the right thing to do. Instead of trying to get all the information, Ichigo decided that Soul Society could go screw itself and its laws. He didn't even bother to ask Urahara or Yoruchi what a reasonable punishment was. Any punishment, in his eyes, was too much. He was thoughtless, and arrogant. And so you too may be thoughtless and arrogant, Masaki concluded. So that's the purpose behind your fights. You want Ichigo to see himself in you. Precisely. Zenai laughed, a chilling, mirthless laugh that sent shivers down Masaki's spine. Every trait that Ichigo sees in me while we fight, he has to acknowledge originated from him and him alone. I will make Ichigo truly see all those things about himself that he tries to deny. Or I will kill him. One way or another, we will be one again. He stood and began to walk away, but Masaki raised her voice. You forget one thing, Zenai. Even when he didn't like it, my son accepted that part of him is hollow when he was confronted with it. He's strong enough to acknowledge every part of himself. Is that so? Both Zenai and Masaki turned their heads at the voice just in time to see Hell walk inside. Well then, I should accelerate my plans, then, shouldn't I? Zenai, you'll be meeting with a new lieutenant of mine to fight Kurosaki Ichigo. Between him, the veritable army he's leading, and my little gift to you, the two of you should easily be able to bring Kurosaki-kun to me. Yes, Hell-sama, Zenai acknowledged deferentially. Where should I find him? I believe he's gone ahead without you, Hell answered with a slight smirk. With a wave of his arm, a portal opened, presumably to Hueco Mundo. You should hurry. Yes, Hell-sama. And with that, Zenai stepped into the portal. Ichigo was continuing his training with his chains when his body stiffened and his eyes unfocused. He lowered his hands. Go to your room, Suki. Now. Ulquiorra, make sure she gets there unharmed, then meet me outside. Suki took one look at her savior's face and took an involuntary step backwards, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Ulquiorra materialized behind her, and without a word grabbed her by the arm, vanishing with her a moment later. Ichigo turned to the other occupants of the training room, the three hollowified wizards. Time's up, training's over. Hell's invaded again, with a much larger force. I can sense Zenai too, and he'll be my problem. There's another with extremely high Ryatsu, he's Ulquiorra's. Your job will be handling the army. Capture where you can, but don't die. Got it? He received resolute nods from all three. Good. Move out. A few moments later, Ichigo stood outside the gates to Las Noches, eyeing the army that had been sent to conquer them. It was incredible, they seemed to stretch into the horizon. Where did Hell get this many people? Are there really this many Tagabito, this many souls dead for eternity? A quiet horror fell over him, one that he could feel echoed within Cazador and Zangetsu. Wow. Lot of enemies out there, Love commented calmly, hefting Tengamaru over his shoulder. Yep, Hiyori agreed. Want to make a competition out of it? Sure, why not? Lisa remained silent, and somehow Ichigo had the feeling that she too was struck by the implications of the enormous army. Then she took a breath and forced herself to relax, looking at Ichigo. We can handle the army. Go take care of Zenai. Before Ichigo could respond, Ulquiorra Sonido-ed next to Ichigo. Kurosaki-sama. Ulquiorra. You know who's leading them? I do. Interest flickered across the Arrancar's eyes. I presume I am to fight him. You are, Ichigo confirmed. Capture if possible. Understood. Okuiora Sonido ed away to a less occupied area, and Ichigo could sense the other strong Ryatsu break away from the army to follow. Ichigo turned towards his Vizardarenkar allies once more. "See you in a bit." Love laughed. "See you," he agreed. Nodding, Ichigo vanished in a burst of Shuinpa, going to where he could sense Zenai waiting for him. "Did you know?" he asked accusingly. "I did not," Zenai denied. "Believe it or not, Hell doesn't share everything with me. He trusts my desires, but he does not trust me not to betray him." Ichigo snorted. With good reason, apparently. The ends of Zenai's lips tugged upwards. Apparently, he concurred. "Shall we begin?" "Reveal the truth, Asahi no Kagami. Tear the sky asunder, Zangetsu." They looked at each other for another moment, and then leapt at each other. Meanwhile, Okuiora stood atop one of the dunes of the desert, facing the cloaked opponent before him with his usual emotionless expression. "So this is how far you'd go," he observed calmly. "This and farther," the figure replied. "I'll go to any lengths to become king." The figure lowered his hood, revealing light blue hair and a maniacal grin. "When I eat you, I'll become Vastolord, and then I'll finally have the power to kick Kurosaki Ichigo's butt. Grimjow Jagerjax will be the next king of Hueco Mundo." And that's it for the chapter. A small look into the mind of Okuiora, cool and logical as always. And apparently Aizen was very, very good at picking the best and brightest for his division. After all, plans could always change, and it was always good to have people with high potential indebted to you. Kodaku no Kishi's technique is very much a double-edged sword. But the negative effects can be minimized with training. Oh, scary thought about Ichigo. It's hard to believe this is hardly ever done. What would Ichigo have done if Rukia wasn't going to be executed, but imprisoned instead? I can totally see Ichigo trying to bust her out anyway. Kinda puts a different view on him, doesn't it? Thankfully, he's matured a bit since then. But Chad's thoughts about Ichigo are pretty morbid too. It's true though. Ichigo hardly seems to care about his human life. Heh. Grimjow's back. I'm looking forward to writing that scene.